Oh, because this is, yeah, it wasn't up there. Hey, hey, hey.
How's it going?
Good.
Sorry.
Now Tyson, tell her what you just said to me. Just have a hard time sleeping after all that excitement.
Made it return, yeah, you bet.
My face is starting to feel. Dana, long time no talk. It's always a good time when Dana comes.
Yeah.
I love you, Dana.
Did you guys have fun at the parade, Brandon?
Did my kids?
Yeah, holding the banner.
Yeah, they did actually. My 11-year-old was, or 12-year-old was here to do it. So 15-year-old or 16-year-old now. They both turned a year older recently. She was a little less enthusiastic, but but I think they both enjoyed it. So my little boy helped pass out candy, and he had a riot.
He was in heaven.
Oh yeah, and
Good.
we were driving along on the golf cart, driving it back here, and he loves Teslas. So it's a battery like a Tesla, so it's kind of like the same.
Yeah.
I said, isn't that pretty cool? And he says, yeah, Dad, I feel so good right now. And I thought he was talking about because he's riding in this battery powered vehicle.
Yeah.
And I was like, because you're driving along in this vehicle? And he's like, no, because handing out that candy was awesome. That made me feel so good.
That's cute. That's awesome. Jeff, how are you? Good.
Hey, how's it going?
Howdy.
There's a card from now.
Yeah, I actually went to go get, I thought, yeah, we were out here. We went to get what I thought was a packet, and I'm like, that's too small. Are we sure that's a packet?
Pretty small. Deep signature.
Yeah, Laurie, you get that on your list to call these guys about the chairs.
I just, they don't roll or anything, and when you sit on those,
Something to contact.
yeah.
This sounds good, Les. You don't have a number for me?
Because I thought it's tracking game.
Well, I'm not spelling out either.
Caution, don't remove the sticker or you'll be fined $1 million.
Is it like a mattress on?
Yeah, there it is.
No, I just thought that your speaker was.
Wow.
I'm sorry. I sound like this is what try to roll on.
Laurie, I got something.
Oh, it's
Sure of it.
I don't mind about rolling, I just.
But hey, Bill's not here.
Please.
Yes, Bill's not here.
I'll call. Give me the number.
That's what it's. Yeah, we want new chairs. These chairs are dumb.
3 days of new budget.
Oh, do we have any leftover money? Hey, chief. We're going strong. We're catching up to Shaysville.
Hey, we got, have you counted them?
We have about, like, almost close to 20. Caseville last week was like 30 something.
That's bad.
Cups and lemonade, there's a state contest going around. All the departments that are participating are taking pictures of kids in the community.
Outside the city.
I don't know.
That's the weird.
I've noticed that all the time. They have a whole lot of noise. I'm here. Is that
Yeah,
fun?
I've seen the most since there.
I think Robbie said we had double points the other day for the bread stand and the book stand.
Yeah, I could not believe in my kids.
Did you see the thank you that I sent?
So back then, I see their birthday's May 27th, the other May 28th. So we had to meet them a whole year to the 19th, right?
Yeah.
And like by the time that got, I was so ready for them.
He gets them right. It's very good.
When they come back, it's like. And I know it's only been a few days, but the weirdness starts here and kind of goes.
It's so true. It's so true.
Is that your first missionary? No.
Ever since I was a kid, I remember hearing a story.
There were some in here. We did by in the shop, the old shop.
It's all ready for them to be done. I know that's.
Look at them. There's, if you go, you know, when you go to Public Works, the main door, and there's some like. Maybe a little bit, all the.
So you tell you. She's. Yeah.
For what? There's lots of good.
That was great. All right, I got 6 o'clock. We'll call the order of this meeting of the Plainview City Council, Tuesday, June 27th, 2023. It's again at 6. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you here. This will be kind of a short agenda, I hope. And then we got a training session. So we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, an opening prayer, reading or expression of thought. Councilman Member Sarah Uri.
Can you all please rise for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Father in heaven, we're grateful to meet together as residents and elected officials and appointed officials and staff for this. We're so grateful that we have the opportunity to act on our city's behalf tonight to make decisions that will better our community and help move it forward in the right direction. Please help us to be mindful and considerate of all the aspects and the things that we need to remember to make the best decisions for those that we represent. We're grateful for the opportunity that we have to serve and help us to bring respect and honor to this office that we hold and to always do our best. We're grateful for our public servants, for our police department, for our public works department, for our city staff. We ask you to please be with them, to watch over them as they do their best to protect and maintain this beautiful community that we live in. We ask you to bless those who are serving in the military that who are leading our state and nation, that they will be watched over and protected as well. We're grateful for this wonderful area that we live in. We've been blessed by so much. And for this wonderful nation as we approach Independence Day and the considerations and remembrances that we have of when our founding fathers came here to protect our freedoms and the opportunities and blessings that we all enjoy. We ask Thy Spirit to be with us tonight. We say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Sarah. Item 1B is declaration of conflicts of interest. Have you had a chance to review the agenda? Is any conflicts to declare? No. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 2, home occupation exception request. Discussion and possible action to grant an exemption to the home occupation conditions for a business to be conducted outside the primary premise located at 4145 North 300 West for an auto detail service. The requester is Jackson Kern Laurie.
The applicant is here, so he is doing an auto detail service in his driveway. You may want to have him kind of explain how he's going to manage having a home occupation that's outside of the home, and that's what his request is, to get that exception. So they're here.
Okay.
This is my son, Jackson. You want to show or you want me to summarize it?
It's pretty much just everything is done like in my garage, and it's like auto detailing. So it's cleaning a car, but on occasion people want outside done. So it's just allowing it to go into my driveway so I can hose it down and rinse it off. So the outside's washed. And then if I do anything else to it, like a buff or a wax, I bring it back inside my house and close up the garage and everything and take care of it there.
Yeah, that's great.
One concern I have is any automotive type, you know, if you'd be steam cleaning engines or any of that kind of stuff, what that would do to our storm sewer. So I don't know if that's, if your plans are to do any steam cleaning of engines. I would think a detail service that would be definitely part of it. So.
Yeah, I usually just focus on like the exterior. I don't do much engine stuff or like the undercarriage, just mostly like cleaning off the paint and stuff and getting it smooth so I can wax it.
Yeah, he just started with just doing interiors, no exteriors at all. Upon request, he just washes the car.
How do you plan to mitigate that, to have it not go into the gutter and go down? If you were to wash the outside of the vehicle, or have paint or any sort of grease?
Well, our driveway is kind of slanted, so when I wash it, because I live on a hill, so it goes down into my backyard usually, like in water.
Yeah, just like when we normally wash our cars, it just goes down the driveway, into the yard. Yeah.
I'm not real strong on the EPA rules, but they do have strong EPA rules and stormwater rules. So I don't know if staff has looked at this and. Yeah. Yeah. Separators, right? Okay. I think maybe it'd be best at this point, unless the council has some other viewpoint, is, you know, we want to make sure we don't get in trouble with the stormwater people, because they're watchdogs. Okay.
Right.
How they test our.
Yeah. And so I think maybe this needs to be vetted. It hasn't been vetted through staff other than just Laurie. So I think maybe that's the next step, is maybe the staff meet
Just one suggestion, Mayor. It sounds like the majority of the business is the interior detailing, and so there could be an approval of just that without allowing the washes unless that's to come back with further.
Is this to expand the business or just? Okay, so yeah, we could probably look at doing the inside detailing type thing, and anything beyond that, we need to vet back through staff.
I have a question. How often are you doing this? How many vehicles?
I do like max 3 a week, but it's been like 1 or 2 a week. I'm going to college, so I don't have a lot of time to do it. So it's just like something I do on the side to make some money.
Yeah, just 1 or 2-ish a week. Was fine.
It bothers me if we can't, I mean, I know that, EPA stuff going on, but it bothers me if we can't really let, well, because I think there's probably a lot of this going on without having this license in the city.
Yeah,
And it's probably, we can call it the detail and they're come in your yard and they do it for you and you're gonna wash it just like they would wash it on vehicle. I'm kind of thinking around, we gotta go forward with it, but just because of the size of it.
yes.
That's exactly my thoughts too. If you were actively running into the gutter system and down through the stormwater, I really think that would be a no. My driveway, same thing. It goes back into my yard, and I think there is an issue with soap. And a lot of car wash soap is a surfactant, and you can put it on the lawns. It doesn't really matter, but it is the grease and oils and things that could be on that paint or whatever it is that. That could be a buildup, and then it's a toxic site for, going tongue in cheek there a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would support with Dave as well. I think it's good for a young man, college guy to have a little bit of, something going on. At least you're not sitting there playing video games. Maybe you are, I don't know. But to be ambitious and as long as it's not, creating something for the neighbors, those are home occupations that we don't want to have. Be just disrupting a neighborhood, what normally happens in a neighborhood. Noises, junk all over, those types of things. And we have to be very careful with home occupations in that regard. I don't anticipate this happening, vacuums or whatever you're using. I do worry about pollution. Again, if it was running out into the street, I would absolutely, I think that's a no. I think we have to, so we can't have those going because we're draining to the stream. We don't have any way of collecting it. Everything goes into the river, canal. That's a huge deal where it's not. And I haven't been by your place.
Yeah, you can check. Yeah, it definitely does not. Because usually the cars are close to where we actually have like an RV side that goes like straight down to the yard, and it's really close because there's a pretty large distance between where he does the car and the road, and we have the slope. So
I would maybe make the motion, Mayor, along with your recommendation that we approve the in-garage detailing as stated. And I'd like to see some pictures or something of the layout of the driveway, the drainage system into your yard, make sure it's not affecting the neighbor's yard. A lot of times driveways are right on the neighbor, and if that goes in the neighbor, that could be an issue.
yeah, that's a good point. Well, we have
Well, anyway,
Yeah.
I'd like to see some pictures and maybe staff review that and maybe look at some, if there are some ordinances of excessive soap in a thing that I'm not aware of, I think that would be something that could come up later, but I'll make that motion to approve inside with staff and allow us to look at maybe some of those, or staff to look at the drainage aspect, that it doesn't go into the gutters.
I'll second that issue.
Any further discussion?
I just had one question too. So when you're detailing the cars, like when you're done, where are you parking them? You're going to kind of have a lineup of cars. You have a spot to put them in the driveway. Like how are you working that part?
We have a pretty good amount of space in the driveway, and because I'm just have the one a day, like I've never done more than one a day because it takes quite a long time. So I'll just have them, I just bring it into the driveway and then put it in the garage. And then if it's done, then I bring it back out in the driveway. And then when people come to pick it up, and they just grab it from there.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's just me.
Okay, any other questions? Okay.
So we had a motion by Steve, second by Sarah. It's like, okay, all in favor, say aye.
I,
Any opposed? Motion carries.
So
So
what are you studying in school?
I've been bouncing around. I did like computer science and kinesiology.
Dad, right?
Nobody bounces around like I did in college, all over the place, but
Yeah.
if you will work with, I don't know, Laura, do you want him to work through you and you can set something up? Staff, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item 3 is award bids. Discussion possible action to consider awarding bids for the following projects. 3A is the 800 West Water Main Replacement to Allied Underground Technology in the amount of $477,203.14. 14 cents is important. All right. Tyson, do you want to take these one at a time?
I have 8 minutes, so hopefully everybody's got a chance to review the recommendation and the attachments with the ones that have it. 800 West, I think it's going to be a great project. It'll loop in an area that's been sort of a single feed. And, it's one of the older sections, so help eliminate the iron in the water calls and help give us options to keep bigger areas in service when issues do arise. It's under budget. 600,000 was budgeted. And so with nothing against or issues with Allied, they should be good to go. The street maintenance.
Let's take them one at a time.
Okay.
So I'd entertain a motion on the 800 West Water Main to Allied Underground Technology in the amount of $477,203.14.
So that's from 3650 north, up to, what is that, 3925, over to 900. So it'll connect that sort of your middle section. That's the main PRV station and all the services from that point up. So it's getting rid of your, galvanized services, whatever we haven't changed over the years during breaks. It's a 6-inch main. It'll go up to an 8-inch. That'll help support all your flows and then that PRV. Yes. And so then we'll try to plan the next street maintenance around redoing that road as a whole would be the goal.
They can just go now and just take out chunks and put the line in. So pretty alligator.
Yes, we've been on that whole section many a times.
Tyson, I'm grateful that you guys got 7 bids. I appreciate that. Looks like we're going with the lowest bidder. And honestly, like, I don't know on the bid tabulation, like a lot of that stuff's kind of Greek to me. I always have just a tiny bit of heartburn when we take the lowest bidder, just because I want to make sure we're getting a good quality product too. Like, do you feel good about what they're proposing here? Do you feel like it was apples to apples, just as fine a material, that kind of thing?
Yeah, the big worry with material is because a lot of their pricing for material was generally at cost. So you do have to watch them, and sometimes you'll get contractors that, you know, they're trying to use up stuff in their yard, but it also is a sign of the times and people trying to get work. And this is probably the most companies we've seen on some of our bids for a while now. So I think they're, you know, hungry and trying to get work and keep work for their guys. So.
Have you worked with Allied before? Do you have a good rating?
I haven't personally. I've seen their trucks around. The engineers have worked with them on other projects and couldn't speak to issues. You know, it's been a while, but no issues at present. So They have all their same bonds and
Dave is giving the nod of approval. That nod, I will entertain a motion, or not entertain, I will make a motion, excuse me, to accept this bid for Allied Underground Technology in the amount of $477,200.
it sounds like they're looking to go pretty quick, so they've already got their submittals ready and they're just waiting for approval to get moving.
And how long will the project take overall?
Probably about months, just give or take on issues, and they've got a few tie-ins they've got to coordinate, and you never know how long sampling, because we got to test it all before. Every now and again, you'll have a leaky gasket and
Right.
have to work through it, but
Oh, yeah. We give warning.
Okay.
No, they're not like watermen break. We have,
No, but, just of what's coming to residents that will be impacted directly of what's coming in.
yes, the next part would be your recon to sit down and go through all of the details, official start dates, start getting notices out, and
How do we keep service going while we replace that service? Is that?
they run it up the side, and you build the new system independent of the old system, so it's all running, and you try to minimize the issues because your water main testing requires it to be isolated, and so you'll jumper in and fill that new section up to do all your testing while everything's live on the old.
Is this going to be, this is water main, but are there services off the water main as well?
Yeah, so the day of the shutdown, whether they end up doing it in sections because I think there's 6 main tie-in points, so there's no way you can do all of those in one go, so they'll have to section it off.
Is that, these, I see that system, right? So.
Yes, it would help. It links to pressure zones, so you could essentially do, if they had enough crews, the bottom 3 and have it closed off at that point, and then do the upper half or something of that nature. But no, that PRV has been dead for a long time. It's in a 4-foot box that you have to lay on the ground to work on it. And it hasn't been in service for a long time.
a motion by Gibson, second by Marriott. Further discussion? Favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 3B, 2023 street maintenance to Staker Parson Company in the amount of $895,000.
So with this, Staker Parsons came in as the low bid. With them, they've had our contract the last few years and they've been great to work with, and I don't see any anticipated issues. This is a bigger tear up for the 43 section from 350 west to the border with North Ogden. It was an odd older section. Did core samples, evaluated and determined it'll be a reconstruct. And then we're going to do some adjustments, get rid of some waterways and change the traffic pattern up there. So the 4300's the through street. And then there's a few subdivisions that are wrapping up that'll be chip seal and the PV drive 1100 to 1000. We'll get an overlay to clean that up in the intersection from all the projects over the years, and then they'll chip all the way to all the way to 800 because that section's all been redone. It just hasn't had a surface treatment for quite a few years.
What's all that? Because that's really almost not a road anymore. There. Well, increase the speed limit.
it is.
Yeah, that one will take some coordination.
One also under budget.
This one's also under budget. It comes out of several different places. There's some park elements in this. You'd get a better price, obviously. So Shady Lane, since that newer section was built, has never had a surface treatment. So that's budgeted as well. And so the new parking lot at Shady Lane will get a treatment and then they'll restripe that to keep it up to service.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve the 2023 street maintenance to Staker Parson Company in the amount of $895,000.
Motion by Arrington, second by Yuri. Further discussion?
So eventually I was. Yeah.
So yeah, 350, right now, 43 stops at 350, but that was just the original setup before 43 went through between 350 and 500. 125. Yeah, and that one, I don't even know the whole story. They randomly turned it into a four-way and it wouldn't warrant that for your traffic flow and what that road is supposed to be. So we'll do some advanced notification when you get closer to putting it back in service as a whole and warn people that traffic pattern is going to change.
So at those intersections, this is the 125 intersection. That's indeed.
So those will be removed. Yep. Yep. Yeah, because that was a phase boundary at one point. And so now we have a way to connect that where it'll go underground and you can get rid of that waterway.
But
No, not on 4,300. So the stopping street will be 125 and 350.
It's not more way,
No, just two-way there.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I think we have time. Right. Are you here for training or are you presenting one of these? Okay. Just want to make sure. Yeah, I'd really like to get these done, but I don't want to keep everybody waiting on the training. So we'll just have to finish the agenda after the training. So let's go to item 6, a joint training workshop with the Planning Commission. Welcome. Looks like we got more than our Planning Commission.
So then we'll come back.
That's great. Yep. Yep. So I guess, Brandon, let me turn it over to you and you.
Sure, that'd be great. I just have a brief introduction. Just a couple of housekeeping items. In context that within the last few years, the state legislature has mandated that planning commissions receive 4 hours of land use training. And so we've worked to schedule this for both the city council and the planning commission. We're very excited to have Craig Call. Craig is a prominent land use attorney here in the state. He has practiced with Anderson, Call, and Wilkinson and is currently the executive director for the Utah Land Use Institute. Craig also had the honor of being the state's first property rights ombudsman for the state of Utah from 1997 to 2007. In that capacity, he assisted in the mediation and arbitration of several thousand land use related disputes. Utah has a rather unique process for mediating land use disputes. What the ombudsman's office does in a lot of ways is keep a lot of land use decisions out of court. They could get bogged down on a much slower timeline. And so the state's found a way to get good legal advice to differing parties, usually cities and developers, and find a way to give them good legal advice that allows them to move forward and see where a compromise might be needed on one. And so that's been very good at sort of keeping a log jam effect from occurring in many land use decisions. Craig also served for 4 years in the Utah legislature and on the city council in Provo. He authored the Utah Citizens Guide to Land Use Regulation. And his most recent publication, actually, I have a few copies of for members of our commission or council, is titled Ground Rules. It's a handbook on Utah land use regulation. It's very well written. It's both detailed and concise at the same time, and easy to read and to understand the details of land use law. He's lectured widely on land use regulation, eminent domain, property rights, and dispute resolution in the United States, as well as in Canada and the People's Republic of China. He also acts as a land use appeals hearing officer for Salt Lake City and other municipalities. And then he participates in a body known as the Utah Land Use Task Force. And he was honored as the practitioner of the year by the real property section of the Utah State Bar in 2019. Personally, I've had the opportunity to listen to Craig provide training quite a number of times, and had the opportunity for a number of years also to work with his son, who is also a land use attorney. And as a family and individually, he knows his stuff. And it's always an honor to hear him. So thank you, Craig, for being here, and I'll turn the time over to you.
Is it 8:30 yet? I thought I'd spend most of the time instead of Brandon doing it. That was fantastic. It is a pleasure to be here. Is this the best place for me to be?
You can turn the podium around if you'd like. We just need you mic'd for the.
Sit down in a chair. You're welcome to do that too.
That'd be fine. Then maybe I could make eye contact.
And we do have refreshments here for everybody as well, so please help yourselves.
We can all come down there and.
We'll come down there and we'll turn the podium around and you can address us that way.
Oh.
How are you?
Carry the mic. You want to carry the mic?
Would you rather have a podium? Either way. And you get somewhere to put your
I'll see it.
items, and I can help you your that right and little slides for you. So.
You're staying up here. I'll just stay up here.
So there's enough of these handouts for everyone. And I also have a copy of this book for everyone who doesn't already have one. Welcome. So how many here are members of the city council? Planning commission? Other staff for cities? Terrific, thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here. I live in Plain City, so it wasn't too far a commute, but it's fun to be here. So the plan I had was that we would talk just generally about a couple of basic principles of land use law. And it's as fundamental as it gets. And I'll try to tell a couple of stories. Some of you in the group I know have already heard it. I know the mayor of Far West just can't get enough of this, evidently. I guess. So we'll talk about this, and to the extent that anyone's seen these stories before, let's get a little deeper and decide what it is that you'd like to know more about that particular issue. And then the second part of the discussion, I'd like to bring up 4 individual cases that the Utah courts have decided in the last few years. So bring us right up to date. One of the cases we'll talk about was just decided 5 months ago in January.
So basically using the principles that we talked about at the beginning, then we'll set the stage to determine what it is that is the bee in the bonnet of the court system at this point, and see what the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals have said. So thank you for your help passing those out. And everyone should also receive a book. We also have a certificate for planning commissioners that would like one, but you can pick that up when we're done. Thank you. Yeah, well, that's a good thing. We'll just leave it there. Okay, so next slide.
Sorry.
The ombudsman, by the way, is paying for my time to come here for the copies of the book and handouts. They have the building inspector charges an extra 1% on every building permit that's issued. And that money goes to the Department of Commerce. Part of it is used to train building inspectors and part of it for this kind of training. So we just want to acknowledge that as we go. Next slide. Copies of ground rules are passed out. We'll talk about that. Next, please. Okay, so when we talk about land use decisions, they always fall into one of these two categories. They are either administrative land use decisions or legislative land use decisions. Legislative decisions are always made by the elected officials. No one else can make them. And these include amending the general plan, annexation, zoning ordinances, the zoning map, some development agreements, and some particular complex development. It just depends on how big that project is. Sometimes the courts have decided that projects that really are fundamentally changing the future of the community are approved by legislative acts if the city council is the entity that's approving them, that those decisions are legislative. So other things we do, like subdivisions, conditional uses, site plan approvals, building permits, appeal authorities, home occupations, variances, those are all administrative acts. And the council may or may not do those things. It's entirely up to the local ordinance. The council decides who does all the administrative acts. And in some cities like Salt Lake City, they just don't do administrative acts. And some cities have a mayor who's independently elected, and that mayor runs an administrative branch and they do all the administrative work. Sometimes with the help of a planning commission or a board of adjustment or a site plan review committee or others that can be appointed to make those decisions. The critical thing about legislative acts is the planning commission almost always makes a recommendation to the city council before it acts on a legislative act. The exception I'm thinking is a moratorium, a 6-month temporary ordinance that might be passed with just 24 hours notice. That's a special occasion and rarely happens. But it is in that situation that a planning commission wouldn't necessarily need to make a recommendation. Okay, next slide. So the planning commission recommends, the elected legislative body decides. Next. This is the standard. If a person wants to challenge a land use decision, they have to show that it's arbitrary, capricious, or illegal. And that standard is applied dramatically differently based on whether or not it's a legislative decision or an administrative one. So let's talk about legislative decisions for a second. This is the standard. This is what the courts have said and what the legislature then adopted in state statute. If an ordinance could promote the general welfare, or even if it's reasonably debatable that it is in the interest of the general welfare, we will uphold it, we being the courts. So basically, well, this is called the rule of the stupid staff. That is, this threshold is so low that if the staff can't come up with some good arguments to help the city attorney win it in court, we've got to get another staff. Because it's very difficult to lose the argument that a land use decision, a land use legislative decision doesn't advance some part of the general welfare. So for what it's worth, well, let's tell you a story. Next slide. This is Draper. Actually, where it says Draper, that's Sandy. And the line across the upper center there is 114th South. And right in the center of this photograph is a brown spot of ground, maybe 12 acres or so. And Harmon Grocery Tours has bought that land to build a grocery store there. Our story unfolds about 20 years ago. Next slide. It's zoned for a special 700 East area master plan. I'm sorry, it's planned for. It is zoned residential, but in the general plan, it shows that it's going to go commercial. It's just they haven't changed the zone yet. Well, changing the zone is a legislative act. That'll be important. This is this picture of what Harmon has done before our story begins. They tore down all the houses that used to face 7th East, and they're coming in for permission. Now, the staff looked at this application and said, great idea. This is just what we need. We're going to zone it commercial. That's what the plan is. So the staff recommends to the planning commission that the planning commission recommend to the council that they rezone this land. Great idea. Fits in perfectly. Then the planning commission, of course, which always does what the staff recommends. If I make a few editorial comments as we go, it's just to keep this a little more entertaining. I'm not here to offend anyone. I don't have any idea. Most of the time what I'm talking about or what you're thinking about. Anyway, so the planning commission recommends approval, goes to the city council. Now you may have noticed in this picture, there are some very nice homes next to this lot. And in those homes are some very nice people. And they have heard about this idea. Now, Harmon's idea is to take advantage of the great traffic exposure on 7th East by facing the store to 7th East. We're looking west, the store will face east. Next picture. This is the front of a Harmon's grocery store. This is the one on 7th East, just north up in Sandy. Isn't that pretty? What does the back of a Harmon's grocery store look like? Which side is going to face the neighbors? The back. So these very nice people from these very nice homes show up, and I just noticed here on the desk, I have the Dignity Index, meaning that we should keep our civil discourse as polite and positive as we can. And I'm sure they had not seen the Dignity Index when they showed up. And they basically explained that it was not a good idea to zone this land for commercial. And the city council said, okay, we're not going to zone it commercial. Harmon's, you can't build your store there. Well, Harmon's, of course, had all this. They had great information. They had engineering plans, architectural drawings, storm drain plans. They had traffic studies. They showed that. In fact, they showed how that great sucking sound you'll hear the minute they open are sales tax dollars from Sandy just going into Draper to boost its budget and all the amenities. And the city council said, okay, yeah, I guess we could approve it, but we are not going to. And that was a split vote. Some council members said, go ahead, and others said not. And the reason was because the neighbors didn't want it. So it goes to court. Harmon's takes it, and the Utah Court of Appeals hears this case. Now, I don't think anyone has their books yet, but if you had your book, we'd read this. I can read it to you. Basically, this is what the court said. Harmon's presented ample information to the city council that would have justified Harmon's requested change in zoning classification. However, in attacking the city's action, Harmon's burden was not to show that the city council had no reason to deny Harmon's application. Rather, the burden was on Harmon's to show that the city's decision to preserve the status quo could not promote the general welfare. I mean, basically, the judges don't want to be the planning commission and they don't want to be the city council. So they don't want to decide what uses are compatible with other uses. Basically, the idea is if the city council thinks it's appropriate, fine. If not, fine. It's a local decision. And what the neighbors think is perfectly appropriate in a legislative context because it's a political decision. Let me show you how much a political. It's a legislative body's prerogative to determine public policy, a judicial body's job to interpret the policy, and administrative body's job to enforce it. Establishing zoning classifications reflects a legislative policy decision with which courts will not interfere except in the most extreme cases. And this is the line that really drives it home. Indeed, we have found no Utah case, nor a case from any other jurisdiction in which a zoning classification was reversed on grounds that it was arbitrary and capricious. So when it comes to writing the ordinances, drawing the zoning map, annexing land, adopting the general plan, generally speaking, the city council's decision is final on those matters. Any question or comment? Yes.
I heard from Farmington City and Apple about that they downed on the whole west side of their community. And then use that in the ordinance to basically collect open space from developers. Either they can for a reason to reestablish the prior 4 acre, 8 acre fee that has become an open space. Big Peter from the planning director that kept waiting for someone to sue us. Oh, we did. Because they would lose, or that they would just sign with it because it was, they were going to get their density back, but it would come with 9 to 18. Now, I thought that was very different. Broad swath of area and just down with it, kind of pull the property right away from those. Overnight.
That's a planted question. Hold that thought. I have a story to tell, and right after I finish this one. And let's come back to it. Okay, next photo. So this is a picture of Harmon's sign when they built their store on this site. You see those houses in the background? That's those houses. Why is there a Harmon grocery store there now if they lost this case? Next slide. It's right on that side. What happened? The council changed. There was an election. And the plan changed. You know your geography. See those mountains to the east? This store is facing north. And if you go there, and I should go during the summertime and take a picture. If you go there, where the original back of Harmon's was going to be, there's a row of single level shops. And if I remember correctly, there's not even a rear door, not a rear light. It looks like a brick wall, an attractive brick wall. And it's not that tall, not certainly as tall as a Harmon store. And then there's a buffer strip planted so luxuriously that if it were in Elko, it would be a national park. I mean, in fact, we have an example of this right here in Harrisville. The Boyer Company came to build a store for Walmart. And there was a lot of concern from the people who live on that road just north of Walmart. And the negotiator for Boyer Company changed that project. And if you go there now, those full growth pine trees and all that foliage that's there and the berm was specifically included to try to make sure that the Boyer Company maintained a great relationship with the neighbors. And it was greatly appreciated. So that's part of the give and take in the legislative process. Harmon's was not entitled to approval. So they came to the table with some more suggestions and then a different city council maybe. So if the neighbors sued because Harmon's was approved, would they win because Harmon's lost last time? No, Harmon's didn't, the neighbors didn't win last time, the city won. The neighbors wouldn't win the next time, the city would win. Again, the issue is it's a city decision. It's up to the city. Comment or question? Okay. Now, suppose you had your land you were going to downzone, just in case. This is just north of the Harmon site in Sandy, the 7th East. And this story is a little antiquated. I'm not sure what's there now. I need to take a drive and take some better pictures. But when our story unfolds, the Sandy Hills Shopping Center was there. It was owned by Smith Investment, which by its name, I mean, they bought some property to invest in it. Next slide. So it's an antiquated shopping center, even at the time this occurred in the late 1990s. And behind it, next slide, is all this vacant land, like 15 or 20 acres. Next slide. So from the air, this is how it looks. And Sandy City on its own, without any request from the landowner, drew a line down behind that store, maybe a continuation of that fence you see on the lot above it, and zoned everything to the left of that line R2. Downzoned it from commercial. And Smith Investment, of course, was not amused by that. So they sued, and the Court of Appeals heard this case. Smith Investment had testimony that was uncontradicted from their appraiser that this property had lost something like $350,000 of value because the zone was changed from commercial to residential. And they said it's a taking. You violated our property rights, and we are suing. The Court of Appeals, I'll paraphrase. This is what the Court of Appeals said. Wah. They said, basically, next slide. Some people win, some people lose. It's the price we pay to live in an ordered society. So this is how much power the council has. Now, these are political decisions, and we know that not many communities do, as was described that Farmington did, because there'd be so much public opposition to it. And so but that doesn't mean the local discretion was eliminated. The local discretion was used because in this case, Sandy said, we have too much commercial property. If anyone's gonna put commercial uses on that land, surrounded on two sides and part of three with single family residential, then we want to make a conscious legislative decision to change that zoning again. And of course, I mean, they did lose $350,000, and that was real money back then. You could have bought a house for $350,000 back then. But the idea is, of course, that the reason they had that value was because the city before that has zoned a commercial. If the city hadn't given them the commercial zoning, they wouldn't have the value that the city took away when it changed the zoning back to residential. Now, that's a little oversimplified, but that's basically how the courts are looking at it. Yes.
Quick question on taking this is something and so hey, have you seen any like detrimental lines claims in there where you buy the property subject to master plan zoning, but more on the taking side, if a city limits the use of a property, let's say we just look down there and said, we want to make sure that that is close to that. And we limit its own good use on it, as you build on it. Should they, do they, the court in that case, try a standard for when it is a taking?
Right. They referred to a famous case called Lucas v. South Carolina Coastal Commission, a United States Supreme Court, written by Justice Scalia, for those in the audience who know who that is. Very conservative justice, and basically said you have to allow some economically viable use. But this is one of the most supreme conservative court justices ever to sit. And he said, but as long as you leave some economically viable use, it's not a taking. Well, I don't know if growing hay counts. So we do have a little bit of that. And there's also what we call vested rights. And they can be several things. One of them, the courts have handled because the dollar amounts are so much. And forgive me for bringing up this subject in Pleasant View, because I know it's something you've thought of before. Gravel pits. But the expansion of a gravel pit, the legislature has got involved in what's a vested right and what are you entitled to and that sort of stuff. May color what legislative actions local governments can do. But these cases are kind of all things considered without some prearranged vested right ordination from the legislature or some other, you mentioned reliance. It's very difficult for someone to rely on an approval that's legislative. People are thought to be sophisticated enough to understand that if it's a legislative decision, they have got to put a lot of money into convincing the local council to approve it. And if they don't approve it, that's the business of being in development.
If it's already someone at the that goes to the superintendent, they want to increase the value of the property. are requesting a rezone, you're not doing it taking or whatever else, they're not requesting a rezone, as long as they use what is already for that.
So can everybody hear the question? Or no? Okay.
It's already agricultural.
Right. So preserving the existing use is probably okay. There may be some exceptions where it's really harsh. And there really isn't if agricultural moves on to the point that you simply can't make money using a 5-acre lot for agriculture, then my guess is we need to come up with another use. But either through antiquated lot boundaries and vested non-conforming lots, somebody can usually build a home on any lot that's legal, any parcel of land that's legal, and that's enough. Building a house on it would count. Okay, next slide.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So that is one of the worst things about being on the city council is, I believe in the property rights. You buy a piece of property, you should be able to do, if I want to build a garage on my property, who cares? The city has no say, generally, but yet we do have say, like the Harmons thing. We don't want that. We don't want that. I don't like apartment complexes. As long as I'm on the city council, I will never approve a high-rise apartment complex in Pleasantview. I just don't like that. So that's my opinion. People elected me to have that opinion. But that's such a battle between, what an individual right of somebody is and then the city's right. I just still, I have a hard time processing that in my mind as to what, we allow as a government or, zoned or a master plan or whatever it is. We want commercial on a certain area. We don't want to allow it past a certain area. We want, half-acre properties or third-acre properties in this area. We kind of look at that and say, that looks good on paper, looks good in my mind, but then, city council change and those things happen. But how do you deal with that? Just the God-given right to have whatever I want on my property versus the will of the people, they speak and anyway.
Well, so that's a good question. And here's the balance. What the courts have done and what the legislature has generally done is this. You have the opportunity legislatively to write rules that people have to follow. But if they come in with an application that follows the rules, you've got to approve. So we'll get to that in a minute. But this, for example, is the Home Depot in Summit County, just outside of Park City. It does not look like the one on 12th Street. Because in Summit County, they made them go through all these architectural refinements, absolutely perfectly legal. Old Glory waves over Monterey, California and Charleston, South Carolina, where they will tell you what color to paint your front door.
Did those changes come before they had did they have that in place before the Home Depot came or when Home Depot when they put forth an application, the planning commission or whatever said, we want, if we allow this to be built, you're going to have rock and timber work and stuff on that Home Depot. Right. That was after the fact.
Well, no, they built this new building to conform with the code in place when
so the code was in place to have that type of look.
And if the code had not been in place, they would not have had to do that. Now, there is some room for negotiation in a zone change. And of course, if there's a legislative discretion and the council can say yes or no, there is an amount of leeway where a property owner and an applicant and the city can talk about things and decide what works best. There is an area of some sensitivity here, and that is if the city says, we're not going to zone this to you unless you deed us this. That gets into an exactions arena. And you go to state law and federal constitutional law, and you may find there could be an illegal taking there, where the city actually takes title to property and demands that kind of dedication or public improvements. That doesn't mean we can't require public improvements. They just have to be proportionate. And if it's not shown to be proportionate, if basically it ends up being what Justice Scalia called an outright plan of extortion, then that will cross the line and not be appropriate.
How do we put that in? None of us have crystal balls. Maybe somebody does to have everything. And we have several commercial areas we want to develop. You know, and to have that look or that feel or whatever that is, built that into that ordinance before they come in is very difficult. You almost have to say, well, okay, if you do that, then I want it to look like this. That's not appropriate in most cases, like, because the ordinance is not there. But if we have,
So it depends on which arena you're in. In the legislative arena, if they need a zone change, there's some room to talk. And I don't mean to encourage that too much because there can be trouble. But in the administrative arena, if the ordinances are not in place, then it's too late.
so you have to put more teeth over in the ordinances.
Right, you've got to draft the ordinance before the application is filed.
But there again, that goes to the crystal ball. I don't know how you put all, I don't know how you put all that in there. I mean, like Park City, that's kind of, I can see that, Park City has just a different look for Park City.
Well, and
I don't know.
it's not an exact science, but one of the things the legislature has recently done is offer all kinds of new planning resources that are available. Local areas of government, the Wasatch Front Regional Council and others are actually hiring new staff to help local governments, particularly smaller communities, get ahead of the game on those kinds of plans. But it's, you have a great planner here.
Is there a generic code or generic set of something that you can put in place that I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I mean, Farmington Station is a look, and that's different than what we have here. Park Cities, that Home Depot is different than we have here in Pleasantview. But is there a set of something that we could just plug in that would cover everything? Not everything, but cover.
Great question. So when it comes to what we refer to affectionately as model ordinances, the city or the Utah League of Cities and Towns, the director starts to choke whenever you use that term. Because that's Cameron, and he basically says you can't do a one-size-fits-all. But the Ombudsman's office has added a new staffer. The Ombudsman has the Envision Utah is right now going through a $250 grant to help draft new ordinances. We at the Institute, the Utah Land Use Institute, are creating a land use library of topical discussions. And with that will be considerations on the drafting of an ordinance. So that the powers that be have heard that sentiment and are doing their best to come up with new resources. But when I was city attorney for Providence up in Cache County, we heard a local group was considering an adult business. And they wanted, of course, they thought that there being lots of college kids up there, it'd be a great place to open an adult business. And Logan wouldn't let them. And so they looked south right on the boundary and there's Providence, and we don't have an adult business ordinance. So we are here basically going, what do we do? And the answer was, we enact a temporary ordinance, a pending ordinance. You have the ability to do some things. And we pulled the ordinance from Provo, pulled the Provo ordinance, put it on the agenda for consideration, and then you have 6 months to adopt it or not. And that basically was an effective way to deal with that issue. So you can do some things in the process of, once you know that applications are pending, but once the application is filed and the fees are paid, then it is too late if they have the entitlement, if the zoning's right. If not, then it's more of a conversation. And I hate to get more specific than that. Yes. Sure.
What Farmington is they had a signage ordinance, couldn't have a sign all over that, I can't remember what it was, 25 feet. They knew that McDonald's would nowhere in the world would have a sign lower than that. So signage on each side. So they enacted ordinance, they actively keep McDonald's out. That was there. So they're not McDonald's. That was what they said back then. That's what it was. They would find ways, and so then McDonald's came in. McDonald's had to negotiate. That's why that Farmington is different. Every McDonald's on the planet, because they want the outside to be covered with
But really, you can be as specific as you want them to be to create the color, the look, the everything of your town, if you want. And you get those ideas from other towns and these resources that Craig always mentioned. You can be specific as you want or not, and then throw the dice and you end up with.
I just don't know how you get there. That's the thing.
So
How do you get to that depth? It's just tough. With the small staff, I don't know. That's just tough.
there are some exceptions, particularly with single family homes, townhomes and duplexes. Recently, the legislature restricted design requirements for those. As far as to Steve's question, the best way that I've seen it done is just take it item by item, break it down to issues of building materials, building massing, and other details like that. And when you try to think of it as one big regulation, it gets overwhelming. But if you can break it down to single issues, like what materials are we okay with? What's the size and scale of the building, other architectural details, then you can break it down. It becomes more manageable. It's sort of a bite, one bite of the elephant at a time.
And for what it's worth, editorially, I mean, there was a time a few years ago when they really talked about walkable communities, and they tried to create what is referred to as form-based codes and apply them in some areas. And that all, conceptually might be good, but in my opinion, one example of the getting the cart too ahead of the market, on the way up through Cache Valley, as you pass the Jensen farm and then go on, you pass a farm implement on the west side, and then there's some buildings there that were built brand new to face away from the street. And they sat empty for years. I mean, it was just the wrong thing to do, and that design standard, in my opinion, did not apply. Now they have turned them around, put glass on the store side. The parking's still behind it, but they tried to take principles that would work in a walkable community and put it on a regional highway, and it just, in my opinion, that didn't work very well. But lots of flexibility, and if it advances the general welfare, we're good. Except now that you mention it, the legislature, now they occasionally do get into the land use business. You knew that, all right? A few years ago, they changed the wording subtly. It used to say if it advances the general welfare, which is what the court said. Now what it says is if your decisions advance the purposes of the Land Use Development and Management Act. And they wrote that. And you mentioned apartments, and just straight up, let me tell you that I think since the Land Use Development Act heavily emphasizes moderate income housing and multifamily, that we might have a problem there. That someone comes in and says, this is the ideal place for this, and denying it does not advance the purposes of LUDMA as far as moderate income housing. Of course, the answer to that is go after your moderate income housing plan and show how you're going to meet the demands of the moderate income housing without those apartments. And
Can you define what that is, moderate income housing?
no,
Because how, you have somebody build that. That's the issue. I hate that.
well,
Because we have a developer come in and build apartments or whatever. And some of those are being charged along Washington Wall. Those are as much as I would pay for a house payment. Is that moderately priced?
no, that's no
Other
question.
than having some rent, a HUD or something come in and subsidize that housing. What's moderate? And I would like to go to the legislature and ask for something on that, because you say cities build moderate income housing for all these people that can't afford it. How do we as a city?
When
say,
we've seen
okay,
this,
bring that in.
when we've seen this, it's been like up in Cache County, they have a housing development authority that's private, a nonprofit group, but that develops housing for that. If cities did not accommodate that kind of plan, then there could be some issues. I don't know what the answer to be. There'd be a really good issue to raise.
We have two trailer parks and a big station park, so we're covered on our, we have townhomes, we have those things, so we're covered on the, as far as the state.
Well,
It's good, but it is, I mean, that's an issue.
I'm just explaining generally how what the legislature's done may change what we call that legislative flexibility, and that's about all I can offer. Next slide. So this is a 57-acre parcel in Summit County. And when I took this picture, the zoning was one house for 40 acres. So this is a building lot. And there's nothing illegal about it at the time. However, economic pressures change over time, people's preferences. This is now hideout, where the density is really high, dozens of units on acres, all around Jordanelle Reservoir. So again, those were legislative decisions where legislative decision makers accommodated pressures and growth and changing things and made the decisions the way their constituents wanted it to be done. And thus, we accommodate growth and it progresses. Next slide. Okay, so this is the legislative standard. If an ordinance could promote the general welfare, or even if it's reasonably debatable that it's in the interest of the general welfare, we will uphold it. So that's legislative. Let's go back to the next slide. So in the administrative arena, then the world is different. When we're doing subdivisions, conditional uses, site plan approvals, building permits, appeal authority, variances, home occupations, all that stuff, we must make a decision that is supported by substantial evidence in the record and consistent with the ordinances, including vested rights. So we have all this flexibility to write the ordinances, but once we've written them, then we have to follow them and apply them the way they're written, even when it's uncomfortable to do so. Next slide. An administrative land use decision will be upheld if it's supported by substantial evidence in the record and is otherwise legal. Next. The land use decision, if it's administrative, even if the legislative body makes it. So you have two different hats you wear as the city councils for Far West and Plain City and Pleasant View and Harrisville and North Ogden, all of whom do some legislative acts and also administrative acts. The roles are different and the standards of review are different, which is a little confusing, but essential to understand. Next slide.
Craig, could I just interject one comment? You detailed really well legislative decisions and the broad discretion that city councils have when they're making legislative decisions such as rezones and similar actions. And then you've just spoken about administrative actions, because I think this is one of the most important points for both city councils and planning commissions to understand the difference between the two, because they have such a wide discretion with legislative actions. There can sometimes be a feeling or perspective that administrative decisions are similar and that broad authority carries over, but they really are different. And there's a much narrower amount of discretion in administrative decisions. And so it's extremely important to understand which type of decision you're dealing with and what amount of discretion you have, and that to recognize that they're two different sandboxes and two different sets of rules. And so just what you said, I think on the last slide about you have to go by the rules that are in place at the time the application is submitted. And when you're dealing with an administrative application is extremely important. And to remember that that's a different mindset you have to apply or you have to put on in the legislative decisions. So.
And every one of the 4 cases that the Utah Supreme Court and Court of Appeals have heard on land use in the last 5 years deals with that topic. So again, I come telling stories of that the problem is not just that a city made a mistake, but the Supreme Court broadcast the names. In fact, in one case, they put the names of the members of the city council in their opinion and called them out. So anyway, that's what the courts are pounding on for sure. So in Utah, the idea is that once you've had all the discretion you need to write the ordinance, once it's written, if the application conforms to the requirements of the land use ordinance and development standards when the application is submitted and the fee is paid, then they're entitled to approval. So when you're reviewing a land use application, the question is not, is this a good idea, or is this what we want? The question is only, does this conform with the ordinance? And we have to provide evidence in the record to support our decision as to whether it does or not, it does not. One of the things that's going on that you may have noticed is it used to be that when a property owner came to the city and they worked things out, that everything was great. But more and more lately, it's third parties that are raising the litigation and challenging the decisions and trying to set aside a decision that the city council made or the planning commission or other land use authority made to approve a project. And sometimes even to the point that it goes, legislative issues can be taken to referendum and the public can second guess them. So we're kind of in a whole new world. Next slide. Now there's two exceptions that I don't really have time to get into. If it's an emergency, a compelling countervailing public interest, say for example, you had a house that slid down the hill and it didn't have wheels. It wasn't a mobile home. It just, if you have ground that suddenly becomes apparently unstable, then a person can come in with a completely qualified building permit application and not get approval because of the incredible high issues of public safety involved. But barring that, vested rights apply to the current ordinances. Second, next slide. If there's an ordinance that is being discussed but not adopted, and if that ordinance would clearly prohibit the application is submitted, then the city has a 6-month window to consider that pending ordinance, as long as the ordinance pended before the application was filed. So the ordinances in place include those that have only been considered for less than 6 months, if they would prohibit the application. Okay. Next. So the land use authority must thus determine whether legally and factually the application complies. If it does, approve it. If it doesn't, deny it. In either case, explain why on the record. Next slide.
Great.
Sure.
So it's a site plan application substantially conforms to have trouble identity. You cannot touch the heart and right behind to worry about it. You give the applicant opportunity to make it.
Yes.
So it's true stuff. And then they. The assumption is that they're given up.
Right. In other words, the application basically conforms. That's one of the reasons why subdivision approvals have always included some kind of a concept plan, then preliminary and final, or at least 2 steps. And each of those steps has its own vesting. So a person comes in with a project that complies with the density and the lot sizes and the street configurations, then that's locked. And then they come in and they talk about all the utilities. And those, of course, on the second round need to comply with the ordinances. And then we're basically, sometimes for final, we want final inspection of the, that it was built correctly. But all that's reasonable. And the legislature, of course, have heard enough stories of what they consider to be unfair treatment that this last round, they limited the number of cycles and the time that a subdivision can be reviewed. That's the pushback we get from Capitol Hill. And the way government works, we have the discretion the state gives us because local governments are creations of the state. And therefore, if the legislature restricts our discretion, then we're pretty well stuck with what the legislature does.
Greg,
Okay,
can I ask a question on this? Just the presentation of substantial evidence on the record. So it's my understanding that in order to apply this and to make decisions most defensible on that cities make, either as planning commission or city councils, is that when they're applying the standard, they can, in their motion, they can make a motion that it's either approved or denied, and then address their reasons as part of the motion, or you can tell me if there's a better way to do that, of issues that not like, well, I like the applicant, he's my friend, or something to that effect, but something that deals with the ordinance, like it meets the setbacks, it meets the height requirements, and it meets all other requirements of the ordinance. Therefore, the motion being that it be deemed approved. Is that the best way to handle it, or would you suggest something different?
Well, that's a planning question again. Let's talk about a story and what happened in that case. Next slide. Now, this involves conditional uses, and I know that every administrative decision is in conditional uses. And does Pleasant View have conditional uses?
We did.
Okay. Does North Ogden? Does Far West? Okay. Well, okay, as well. All right. So, and Plain City does too. So a conditional use is to be approved if reasonable conditions are proposed or can be imposed to mitigate the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of the proposed use in accordance with applicable standards in the ordinance. So this is the most complicated administrative review, partly because it looks like we've got discretion, because we got all these, what are the relative, what are the reasonably anticipated negative effects? And can they be mitigated? And what conditions can we impose that are reasonable that will mitigate those reasonably anticipated detrimental effects? So it looks like there's a lot of room for discussion. There is some, but by the time we get through with the 5 stories I'll tell, we'll see just how much longer you want to talk about conditional uses. But the idea is, if they comply with the ordinance, they're entitled to approval. And in reviewing their application, we're stuck with what the ordinance gives us in terms of discretion. Next slide. So this is how we do it. What are the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects? 2, can they be mitigated? 3, what reasonable conditions does the ordinance allow to be imposed? Because again, if they comply with the ordinance, they're good. Next. So this is West Jordan. And I'm sorry for the bad photo. That's Dannon Yogurt. You can see on the side. Dannon has like 5 acres of ground here, and most of it, at least when I took this picture, was grass. I don't know. They might have been prevailed upon by the Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District to change that. But West Jordan loves Dannon. Let me show you how much. Next slide. Where Dannon is, there is prosperity. So Dannon is the anchor of a West Side Industrial Park. And this is going to be this is the industrial base, the jobs base. This is just terrific. Exactly what West Jordan wants. They don't want to just be a suburb. They want to have their own vigor and vitality, just like Draper and Sandy. And so they have this great industrial park. Next slide. But right next to Dannon is a outdoor construction yard, and it's junky, and it's not well hidden. Next slide. So if you look from the east toward the Dannon plant, you see the construction equipment. That is not the image the city wants in their upscale industrial campus. Next slide. And all the land around Dannon is undeveloped. So Wadsworth Construction comes in and says, okay, we want to build a construction yard. Now the city staff looks at this and says, well, we don't think that's the best use here. And Wadsworth says, but look, it's in your ordinance. It says right here, outdoor construction is a permitted use with conditions. It's a conditional use. There's only 2 kinds of uses that are allowed, permitted uses and conditional uses. But conditional uses are permitted with conditions. They're not prohibited with conditions. They're permitted with conditions. So the city staff reviews this, tells the planning commission, yeah, we probably need to approve it. The planning commission hears neighborhood opposition. Now, we talked about in the Harmon case that neighborhood opposition was perfectly suitable to be heard and taken into account in the legislative decision. But in this case, ironically, who are the complaining neighbors? The other industries. It's Dannon. The city, recruited them here and said, come and help us build all this. Anyway, so Dannon says, no, we don't want it. And so the city planning commission votes to deny the conditional use. And then the city council votes on appeal. They chose themselves to be the appeal authority, a mistake I hope no one makes, and thus in a quasi-judicial role, heard the matter and made a decision. So let me just read you what they decided in this case. So the city council turns it down, and this is why. 4 reasons. 1, the city's made a significant investment in bringing Dan into the area, and attributes which attracted Dan into the area need to be maintained. Outdoor storage is detrimental to the area, making the area less attractive and injurious to the goals of the city. 2, outdoor storage may be considered to be a nuisance to neighboring property owners. 3, outdoor storage would encompass the majority of the parcel. The area and intensity of outdoor storage are much different than that of neighboring property owners. 4, outdoor storage is detrimental to the existing and future businesses in the area and is not harmonious with the goals of the city. Next slide. The question is there substantial evidence in the record to support these conclusions? Next slide. Substantial evidence means it's beyond a scintilla. A reasonable mind would accept as adequate to support a conclusion. So if we go to court, you know, you've all watched the legal dramas on TV. There's a kind of a wide range of evidence. So you have beyond a reasonable doubt, clear and convincing evidence, preponderance of the evidence, enough to lose a civil case. And then when you look for substantial evidence, where is it on this meter? All the way over here. It just has to be more than scintilla. So let's say, for example, that the decision is this ground safe geologically? And we've got 1 geological engineer saying it's safe and 10 that say it's not safe. How do we have to decide? Either way, you've got substantial evidence on either side. But you have to have substantial evidence on the side you choose. Okay. So West Jordan loses this case. What the court is saying is there's not a shred of evidence in any of that. Those are policy considerations. That's legislative talk. It's injurious to the goals of the city. Well, guess what? Where do you find the goals of the city anyway? In the zoning ordinance? And in the zoning ordinance, it says this use is allowed. So with all your legislative discretion, you said this use was desirable or you wouldn't have put it in there. And now you're saying it's injurious to the goals of the city. Well, that's arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable. Similarly, this is the direct reading from the court. In denying Wadsworth's application, the city relied on its finding that the city made a significant investment in bringing Dan into the area, and outdoor storage is detrimental to the area and injurious to goals of the city. However, the only evidence in the record supporting this finding is the concern expressed by neighboring landowners. So that is not substantial evidence. The record does not reveal whether the commission staff actually investigated the concerns raised at the public hearing or why they concluded that outdoor storage on Wadsworth property in an industrial zone would be adverse to the city's goals. Similarly, the sole evidence supporting the city council's determination that Wadsworth's outdoor storage may be considered a nuisance is a concern raised by neighboring property owners regarding potential increases in rodent traffic and dust. Although the city ordinance authorized the city to deny Wadsworth's application if it was deemed a nuisance, the city council did not find that Wadsworth storage would actually constitute a nuisance. Remember what the finding was? Well, the neighbors think it might be a nuisance. Well, is that deeming it a nuisance? What the court is saying, look, if it says that you have to deem it a nuisance, then deem it. Deem it? I mean, thus this finding was also insufficient to justify denial of the conditional use application. So basically, we look at the rules, and the rules say outdoor storage is allowed in the zone. Our question is, what aspects of the outdoor storage might be detrimental and how do we mitigate it? Period.
The conditions have to be listed.
Oh, yeah.
That's what you can't just support conditions.
You can't say, well, you got this conditional use 3 years ago and we're thinking of new condition. No. They have to be in the record of the decision. Another planted question, I might add. Yes.
The information from council has denied districts. Sounds like what would have been perfectly suitable in a legislative decision prior to law for coming in,
Right.
eliminating that use out of the company. Right, so that had they done that with the same information at a legislative level prior to the application being made, it would have been.
Right. So all that Dan and need, if they wanted to protect the area, was to look at what's allowed in the zoning ordinance and say, we prefer those not be there. The city could have it, put it on the agenda for the next meeting, and bingo, you have a pending ordinance that wouldn't have allowed the application. But once the application was filed, if he was paid, it's too late. Next slide. So evidence is not opinion unless it's by an expert. Evidence is solid, reliable information that a court would rely on to make a decision. It has to be relevant. It has to be independent enough to be credible and expert or otherwise credible. Now, that doesn't mean that the applicant can't provide substantial evidence. In fact, they had better, because the burden's on them to show that it fits. But the people, it's just not opinion. It's not opinion by the decision maker. It's not opinion by the public. It has to be opinion by people who have an experience in the area. And it has to be limited to the issues that are raised in the ordinance. Next slide. So this is Wadsworth's building in West Jordan. Much better looking than another one. Next slide. It has a 7-foot wall around it, decorative brick, and across this opening, I'm sure there was a attractive fence, obscured fence, so you couldn't see like you could the other. That's a perfectly good way to mitigate the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects. Question or comment?
Yeah, I have a question. I wanted to clarify your comments about specifying the conditions. It's my understanding, though, that just Councilmember Yuri's question, that you can let me know if I'm missing something, but that the conditions can be specified at the time of the decision by the approval body. They don't have to be something in the ordinance for a conditional use. They take the application and they say, okay, there are these potentially harmful effects for use, and we feel that these particular conditions of approval will mitigate the potentially harmful negative effects. And they can specify that as a body at the time of the approval. They can't be added after the approval, but they also don't have to be in the ordinance specifically. Is that?
So they can be standards like, excuse me, I should be on the mic in case there's anyone online. Standards like they have to not create a nuisance, or they have to be, they have to insulate from noise and lighting or odors or, those kinds of things. Yeah. Then you're limited to what those standards are. For example, another use that has happened in Utah occasionally that always brings forth you can hear the planning staff just rejoicing when someone comes in with an application for one of these uses because they know how much fun it's going to be. Alcoholic Recovery Center or a home for wayward boys. So out in Duchesne County, there was an outfit proposing to build a group home for troubled boys called the Uinta Mountain Homes. And they came in and the planning commission imposed conditions based on different factors that they wanted it to be fenced. They actually wanted the owners to report to the neighbors on a 30-day basis on what was going on and talk to them and stay, in conversation. And the Court of Appeals upheld those conditions. But it was appealed to the county commission who went through it. And what happened was the planning commission had said in its decision that they were limited to 10 boys. And the applicant has said their financial break-even point was 12 or 15, I guess it was. And so they couldn't do it with just 10 boys. And the planning commission with substantial evidence in the record said, the health department has said the square footage of the buildings on the property that you are proposing to use is only reasonable to adequately house 10 boys. Other than that, they'd be beyond the standards the health department is saying. You know, health department, expert witness, substantial evidence. So the planning commission has substantial evidence to support its determination to impose a condition limiting the number of boys to 10. So both the neighbors and the applicant appealed to the county commission, who had appointed themselves the appeal authority, and the planning commit, or the county commission heard from the applicant who said, I can't make it with less than 15 boys. And so the county commission turned it down because it wasn't financially viable by the applicant's own admission. And the Court of Appeal said, where does it say financial viability in the ordinance? So there were issues in the ordinance about welfare and nuisance and traffic and noise, but nothing about financial viability. And going to an issue that was not in the standards of the ordinance, it scuttled the county's position. And by the way, they're dealing with the Fair Housing Act, and it wasn't a pretty picture after that because they were sued for millions of dollars. So anyway, Wadsworth is in West Jordan. And now apartments have been built all around there. Industrial uses didn't turn out to be the best. And the irony of it is, the American public has turned from those natural yogurts they made to Greek yogurts, and the plant stinks to high heaven. Just saying. Okay. Next sign. I'm quoting a resident, a West Jordanian. Okay, so administrative land use decision will be held if it's supported by substantial evidence in the record and is otherwise legal. So it can't violate a state or federal law, but it has to be upheld by substantial evidence in the record as well. And the record is the minutes, the application, the comments received, and the staff report. Those are all items of evidence in the record. And it has to be, the evidence has to be there. And the decision maker has to do findings of fact and conclusions of law to support how the decision was made and how to support it. I mean, to memorialize that. Next. Okay, we talked about what conditional uses are. Again, I don't know why these cases all revolve around it, but we're now moving to the second part, and I'll tell you about these recent court cases. Next slide. Okay, this is Moab. And this is Arches Drive. It's shaped like a boomerang, like a V on its side. And wouldn't you know it, the guy who wants to have a bed and breakfast would pick the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. And so the McElhaney's decide they'd like to have a bed and breakfast. Moab allows it as a conditional use. And I don't know how many neighbors there are on that cul-de-sac, but more than that showed up to protest. The planning commission approved the use and imposed some conditions, you know, hours of operation, parking requirements, things like that. And then the city council heard it, and the city council, of course, this is where the court called them out by name. And if you look at your handout, this is the first case here. So on page 2, McElhaney v. Moab. I'm sorry. So the first thing that's pointed out in this case is number 1, vested rights. So the land use application is entitled to approval if it complies with the ordinance. In review, the application involves only the question, does the application comply? The next item here, substantial evidence is required for each part of the decision to approve or deny. For a conditional use, evidence to support the identification of the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects, evidence to support the decision as to whether each RADE can be mitigated or not, and then evidence to support the determination that specific conditions will mitigate the RADEs and that they're not unreasonable. The court quoted the transcript, and each member of the city council who voted to deny was quoted in the case. One of them said, I just don't think we want to do it because the neighbors don't want it. I mean, the judges are basically saying that's not the question. You decided the question of whether or not this is appropriate when you allowed it in the zone. And that doesn't cut it. Number three, the term substantial evidence is a legal term of art. This means that those words convey the meaning in thousands of court cases in administrative law and include that entire body of law. It does not exist in the absence of findings in the record that explain the basis for the decision. So this decision actually frustrated me when it came down, because I hear the McElhaney's go and they go through the process, go through all the hoops, go to the planning commission, through the staff, through the planning commission, through the city council, to the district court, then to the Utah Supreme Court, who took this case personally because they wanted to make the point. And what did the Utah Supreme Court say? Go back to the city and start over. They didn't do it right. So that's item 4 here. It's not the job of the district court to create a record and find substantial evidence. If the local land use authority or appeal authority does not do that, including the statement on the record of the reasons for its decisions, then no one else can. Number 5, if there's no basis to review, then the court sends the matter back to the city and tells them to start over. Now, McElhaney's got their approval. I went onto Airbnb to see if they were listed, but they're not. And I don't know why. There are 270 short-term rentals in Moab. I mean, I didn't know there were 270 houses in Moab. But something was worked out. I know in some cases, the city just decided they would pay damages. And I don't know that happened here, but things were otherwise worked out. Next slide. We can go down to the next picture. This basically just duplicates the information in the written handout. Okay. But the bottom line is, and the court made this stridently, you have to give us reasons for the decision and they have to be evidence. They can't be conjecture, opinion. They can't be apprehensions. They have to be real. And this case is a great follow-up. This case quotes the McElhaney case. What's going on here is that this is one of the last areas of broad agriculture area along the Wasatch Front. This is southern Utah County. And it is really something. Down through Alberta and Santaquin are the last orchards, some of the last dairy farms. And it's a terrific place where you get a glimpse of how agriculture used to be. The little crossroads called Benjamin is right in the center of that picture. Next slide. Right in the hillside next to Benjamin, however, is a terrific deposit of minerals available for road construction. Now, one of the interesting things when it comes to mineral extraction is that, of course, the state is the biggest customer of mineral extraction. So they, being a great customer, can often be persuaded to do things to keep the cost down by limiting local land use control of mineral extraction. And another problem, of course, is that this is the only way to get to this particular location where they have an asphalt batch plant is to go through that area of agriculture, through the crossroads of Benjamin and connect to I-15. So as our story unfolds, Kilgore Companies has a permit for this use. It's not very old. They just got it a year or two before. Next slide. But they created this batch plant. Next slide. And it's a pretty big operation. This is what Google Earth looked like. Next slide. And I took this picture. Next slide. So they have these very tall silos they use to prepare their product, load in there, and then download it into the trucks that haul things in and out of there. And they come back to the county for a conditional use permit. The request is, as they build room for more silos, they want to build the silos 100 feet tall, and the ordinance only allows 40. But you can go over the height with a conditional use approval. So Kilgore comes in and says, we want to build taller structures. And that's our only request. We already are limited by the existing conditional use. We can't put another truck on the road. We can't increase our production. We're limited by the conditions we've all agreed to and that you imposed as a conditional use to do exactly what we're doing. So what we are proposing will have no effect whatsoever on traffic or noise or dust or anything. It's simply, are we going to put them in a few silos or are we going to build more 40-foot silos? Because, you know, we can build 3 100-foot silos or we can build 12 40-foot silos. Obviously, the shorter ones will cost more. And so we'd like to build the tall ones, but it'll have no effect. Number 6, the evidence provided by company officials based on their expertise was held to be substantial evidence. Now, as you'd expect, the neighbors showed up here and they talked about trucks and traffic and noise and dust and all of those things. But they had no evidence. There was no neighbor with any evidence to contradict what the applicant said, that this would not create a new aggravation of any of those things. There was no evidence in the record. The expertise of planning staff was held to be substantial evidence. The planning staff had said, these people have provided an application that's consistent with the ordinance. These are the reasonably anticipated negative effects. They are purely visual. If they paint the silos this color, they'll barely be visible. And we think you need to apply this to approve the use, because the visual impact can be mitigated by painting the silos. And if you can mitigate it, then you have to approve it. That's the staff report, and it was held to be substantial evidence. Public comments. The statement of the general public about matters of professional expertise, including hearsay statements by realtors, was held to not be substantial evidence. So that Kilgore did a really good job here as the applicant. The neighbors came in and said, oh, well, I have a realtor that said the value of my house is going to drop by 50%. Have the next slide. I mean, that's what you see from the plant. I'm not sure which house would be affected to 50%. Next slide. That's looking to this is looking to the other direction, toward the northwest or northeast, excuse me. But anyway, Kilgore brought in an appraiser, a certified MAI appraiser, who showed comparables and went through all the analysis and said there'll be no impact on property values here. So where was the evidence? There's no evidence that it will affect anyone's property values, because the concern to the neighbors was not evidence. Specific application, and any land use application, including for conditional use, the issue is limited to the effect of the specific application and not to the general operation of existing use, where the proposed use has no effect on the impact of the existing use. So all they're asking for is the height of the silos. And as you'd expect, that the concern of the community, I mean, they said these guys don't stop at the stop signs, and their congestion in Benjamin and all this stuff. And I have no doubt it's absolutely true. And it absolutely would have been exactly the thing to do to talk about when gravel excavation, mineral extraction was approved in the ordinance. But not now that, the boat left the dock. That train left the station. And yet the Board of Adjustment, in this case, that heard it as the appeal authority, was so persuaded by the public furor that they turned down the application. That said, number 10, perhaps unlike the situation in McElhaney, Kilgore Companies performed its task well. It established by preponderance of professional and relevant and substantial evidence that its application complied. And then the burden shifts to the opposition. Those opposing conditional use permits should consider placing their focus on proposing reasonable conditions and not on arguing that the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects can't be mitigated, and thus that it may be denied. The state statute specifically reminds those involved that mitigated does not mean eliminated. Okay? Now, that's just a certain type of administrative decision. But it's the same standard. So someone comes in, for example, and They want a subdivision approval. Then we look at the standards in the ordinance and we show by substantial evidence whether or not it complies or not. Now, when a subdivision is brought in, some engineering company has designed the whole thing and stamped it. That is substantial evidence in the record. If the engineer stamps it and says this complies, or stands at the podium and says this complies, that's substantial evidence in the record. So those who oppose it have to show it doesn't comply. So if the density's off for the zone, or the street widths are different, or it doesn't comply in other areas of the ordinances, that absolutely is worth chewing on. But it's too late to have the density discussion, the congestion discussion, the traffic discussion, if the zone was in place and the application conforms. Somebody else want to talk for a minute? I'm getting dry. Yes.
For the cases that so the city or the county to stuff in their standards and said, if you find additional important, so they'll let you more of them. But when both comes to it, and yellow and 8 months. The bigger you vote.
That's what they tried to do. They lost. Court of Appeal said no. There was no evidence that refusing the height would have any impact.
They would refuse the height, but they wouldn't.
That's what they did.
That is conditional use, so it's going to have artificial sites to the burdens on the applicant to prove and they prove. Because it's a conditional use and the city couldn't oppose what their proof was or provide substantial evidence, arguing against it, that's why they lost.
So, and thanks for the clarification. They were entitled to build the 40-foot towers.
Well, didn't you mention that in the original approval with the 40-foot tower, there was some language in there that said that they could potentially exceed that with
No.
additional.
No, it just, basically it limited the truck traffic, it limited the hours of operation, it imposed their standards. While I was there taking the pictures, water trucks went by 3 times and sprinkled water all over the area. I mean, they had done a lot, but all they were asking was for the exception to go to 100 feet. The county denied it and said, no, you can build 40.
So the Board of Adjustments sided with the public, but then did they take it to the court?
District Court and then to the Court of Appeals. They couldn't prove there was any legitimate reason to deny. And that's basically a principle of Utah law. A person's entitled to approval unless there's evidence to show that their use can't be mitigated in a conditional use context. Right.
But it's a condition, so then it's up to.
But only reasonable conditions and only consistent with the ordinance. More? Sure.
So we listen to all the uses that specific development conditional. Those that go today that those just apply to all, that is apply to all, in order to see money.
Well, no, you need to identify what here's a conditional use. This is what we think the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects of this use are. Yes. Well, this was a pretty simple one. Can it be 100 foot tall? Sure, absolutely. And they were in this case. Mhm. Yeah, they give general guidelines. And sometimes you can have a conditional use that says you can have a gas station, but in this case, you have to meet these conditions in the ordinance, not in a case-by-case basis, but in the ordinance. And rather than have you make up a story, let me tell you one. Next, let's go past the wording slides and on to the next picture. Here we go. This is Springdale. And by the way, I am so glad with all the cases aren't Wasatch Front anymore. People out there, I'm an attorney. People all over the state are doing their part to make attorneys busy. And here, you've got a case in Springville, you've got a case in Moab, you've got a case in Springdale. And then we're gonna do Monticello. I mean, you know, those rural guys are getting out and suing each other just like we do in the Wasatch Front. Not like they do in Park City, but just like they do in the Wasatch Front. It's terrific. Anyway, so this is Springdale. And at the top of the picture is the entrance to Zion Park. And the road that kind of winds through there is the road you've all been on that goes up to the park. And the Springdale, you can barely see the wording there where the center of the metropolis is, but that's what they've decided to do, of course, is the National Park Service has you ride a shuttle now. You've got to find a place to park. Well, Alan Staker has this property that's circled in a colored oblong there. Let's look a little closer. Next slide. So he has this land, next slide. It just has this rundown house on it. If he removes the house, he can put 80 parking places on that property. Now at $40 a day, times that up. This is a good thing to do. And the town of Springdale has an ordinance that allows parking as a conditional use on his property. So he comes in and asks for a conditional use. Number 12, Springdale Town survived this challenge because of extended analysis of the issues on the record. Through 3 levels of review conducted by the town's land use decision makers, there were adequate findings of fact and conclusions of law to support the decision. They turned it down. Now, in this case, they did rely on issues that the neighbors had personal knowledge of. Like the lady whose house was right here and her bedroom window was here, lined up directly with one of the parking spots, maybe 3 or 4 of them that he was planning. And she said, this is not consistent with the residential neighborhood, which might be one of the standards. Now, this property was zoned with a zone that was used throughout the community, and parking was allowed in this zone in other parishes of the community. In fact, the community approved 2 parking lots. But this property in this location, based on the evidence on the record, was simply a place where the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects could not be mitigated. Why? The land's too narrow, it's surrounded by other houses, and the property owner did not meet his burden to show by substantial evidence how he was going to mitigate those things. He just thought he should get approval. And the city basically said, well, why? How are you going to mitigate these uses? And he said, well, that's just citizen clamor. And the city said, no, these are legitimate issues. How are you going to handle noise and lights and traffic and stormwater runoff and all this from an asphalt, 3 acres of asphalt right here in the middle of this residence? And Staker didn't meet the burden. So guess what? It goes both ways. Sure. Yes. Yeah, in fact, in all candor, I told this story at the American Planning Association in Vernal last month. And the director of planning for Springdale was there. He said, we thought we were going to lose every single time this place. But we survived. And it was a split decision by the court. The Court of Appeals had 3 judges, and one of the judges said, I would overturn the denial. But she also said, Staker should have met his burden. He should have done what Kilgore did. Get an appraiser to show it's not going to affect anybody's property values. The burden's still on the applicant. But this is one case where the conditional use proposed was so sensitive to the land uses adjacent to it that the town survived the denial. Now, I can see this happening. Let's say, for example, that I want to build a gas station and I have a lot and there's a car wash right here and an auto parts store right here. You're not going to turn me down. But if there's a nursing home here and a hospital here, then I think I could be turned down. Saying in that location, in that area, it just can't, the reasonably anticipated detrimental effects can't be mitigated. Because you can't restrict a convenience store to operating 3 hours a day. And it has to, it just doesn't work. And I serve as a land use hearing officer. I'm the appeal authority for a dozen jurisdictions. one of which until recently was Salt Lake City, I termed out. But somebody wanted to build a pub in Sugar House, believe maybe a little north of Sugar House. And I supported the city's denial because the police chief had testified there just simply wasn't a way to mitigate the parking impact of a successful pub in that location with a zero lot line next to residential areas. And the police chief was an expert. It was perfectly adequate to do that. Yeah. If it comes from an expert source, but not just general apprehension. I mean, it's just not something that a layperson can establish with evidence. Make sense? Other comments? Okay. Next slide. So let's see, what did we get to? Springdale Town survived this challenge because of extended analysis. 13, deference to locals. The court's duty to defer to the local decision makers may have carried the day. So when it goes to court, the judge is supposed to uphold the city if he can. If the judge looks at it and she says, I could go either way, then she needs to hold in favor of the city. Because what the legislature wrote, occasionally they get this in a way that favors cities. They said a local land use decision shall be upheld unless it's shown that it's not supported by substantial evidence in the record. So the bias still goes to the city. Question or comment about that? Quality of evidence. The applicant could have provided a better record to support his position if he'd engaged professional expertise to demonstrate that his proposed mitigation measures would have acted to mitigate the raids. Had he done so, the result might have been different, as indicated by the dissenting opinion. By the way, the legislature amended the definition of substantial evidence after this case to try to make it more clear, just as McElhaney did, that it has to be beyond a reasonable, it has to be more than a scintilla. It has to be something that a person could rely on to establish a fact in a court of law. Okay. Next picture. Monticello is the kind of in the upper right-hand corner of the center. That's Monticello. And those circles along the road are wind farm. They are turbines. They're wind machines on every one of them, 27 of them built there. What happened here was in 2012, 2013, an outfit called Wasatch Wind Energy or Wasatch Energy, something like that. By the way, if I'm going to Southern Utah, I would not name my company after the Wasatch Front. Just saying, But they came down to Monticello and got a conditional use permit to build these wind turbines. But conditions were attached that they had to comply with to try to mitigate the impact of these machines, these turbines on the neighbors. And after the operation had been in place for not a long time, the neighbors came back to the Planning Commission and said, they're not complying, we hate these things, jerk the permit. And the Planning Commission heard from the applicant, the owner of the turbines, and said, well, we're not going to pull the permit. So then the neighbors went to the county commission, who again, unfortunately, serve as the appeal authority. Very difficult for elected body to do that. This is San Juan County. And the county commission let the people with the turbines speak, but refused to allow the applicant for the appeal to say anything, and couldn't present any evidence. But the people with the turbines spoke and showed all these things they tried to do. And this county commission said, we're not going to pull the conditional use permit. So then this goes to the district court and then on to the Court of Appeals. Number 15, there's only one entity that can create the required record. If that's the original land use authority, in this case, the Planning Commission, then neither the appeal authority nor the court can supplement the record. So this is the case that was decided this year. And what the court said is the county commission could not consider anything in its review except what the planning commission had written. And the planning commission had no evidence to support the decision. There was all kinds of evidence they could have used, they just didn't put it in the record. They had received extensive engineering reports on the functioning of the turbines and how it was all going and what was done and what wasn't done, and the planning commission did not put it in the record. And then it goes to the county commission and they hold a new hearing and try to establish a new record. And in their county with their rules, they couldn't do that. So the court simply said, like in McElhaney, you've got to go back to the planning commission and start over. This case has been going for 9 years.
Sorry.
Yes.
So you can put it in the record, if it's like in the packet material, is that sufficient, or you're talking like presented with the motion?
Presented with the motion.
Or verbal statements?
Well, what the courts have said is the verbal statements from the Moab City Council were not enough. They were clearly not. What was written by the staff in the Staker case in Springdale was sufficient. And the staff would have simply said, commission, what do you know, the commission hears all this stuff and decides about, what how they're leaning or whatever they want to do. And whether before the decision is made or after they've got a sense of how it's going, they can certainly turn to the staff and say, okay, we think these are the factors we're considering here. Would you prepare those in terms of findings and conclusions that we can rely on? Or if someone on the commission or the council is, capable of doing it, they start writing it out and handing it to the person taking the notes, but it needs to be in the minutes. It needs to be stated. And when I do a hearing, I make a long list of findings of fact and conclusions as the hearing officer, because I don't want the jurisdictions that I'm trying to represent to have to not only pay the modest fee I charge, but then pay to go fight this whole thing all over again. And it's not that it hasn't happened. One of my cases went to the Supreme Court, mainly because there are certain industries in the state which do have the funds to fight. And I made a decision that had to do with billboards. So the billboard industry was not amused by my decision. Anyway, so the number 16, there must be an adequate record. Applicants and third parties cannot rely on an approval of their favor unless they do their part to provide evidence and analysis to support the decision. If the local body does not have the ability to provide an adequate record, anyone who wishes to see the decision upheld must protect its own interests by bolstering that record themselves. So a person could come up to the dais and say, I know the issue here is whether or not our turbines are operating in an appropriate way. And I'm laying upon the record this written summary, this and this and this and this expert, our own manager, this is what happens here. And here's an audio specialist who handled he did the decibel levels in the front yard of each of these people. And this is what they are. And the local ordinance says it's this, and they're not that high. And yes, it provides a background noise. And that was understood to be happening when you approve this use. In other words, you can't approve a turbine use and say, but it can't be noisy. I mean, it's noisy. And here's how we're making it less noisy. And the applicant then protects themselves by putting that on the record for the city. And if the neighbors want to complain or argue, then they need to come in and they could bring in an expert saying, this is why these turbines are operated improperly. And this is what we did. And, the neighbors can certainly certify what they know. Like with the mineral extraction, we counted this many trucks on this road at this time, and here's a photo of every one of them. They violated it. I heard a hearing from a medical doctor who had a whole lot of time on his hands, and he didn't like the way the neighbor built a shed on their property. So he went and photographed everybody's shed in the neighborhood. And I said, well, there's the evidence. It looks like sheds to me, and nobody here is saying those aren't all the sheds in the neighborhood, so I'm taking that as evidence. I mean, it's not like the public can't provide any information, but it has to be empirical, independent, and credible, and then it can be relied on. That makes some sense? Comment or question about that? Okay. In today's land use climate, there are three entities: the municipality, the applicant, and third parties, in this case, neighbors, to challenge a decision. Each of them has the ability to intervene and undo approvals or denials. So even if the applicant and the city are on the same page, the record must be established and the applicant needs to meet their burden that the basis is there. And remembering, when we attach a condition, and conditional uses aren't the only ones where you attach conditions. I mean, I've seen the plats that are approved and there's all kinds of things listed there. If a person, if a local city is saying, you must extend this street into the neighboring property as a way to meet our connectivity ordinance. And the property owner might say, that's a taking because you're not solving a problem that I'm creating. That's someone else's burden. You're eliminating a lot. And if there's going to be a challenge, then the record needs to explain how the city's decision meets that standard so that it is fair and equitable, and thus it will survive. Again, the city gets the benefit of the doubt. Does that make some sense? Yeah, and it's that in the subdivision, for once, not talking about conditional uses for a minute. Let's say we have a connectivity ordinance that requires subdivision as they are created to connect with each other. And generally speaking, all things being equal, roughly proportionate, that's going to be fine. But when I once had a situation in another city with the word pleasant in its name, but this person wanted to do a lot split and create 3 lots. And the city said, no, you're running a street through the center. You only get 2. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't think this person's creating the need that they completely lose a third of the value of their property. That's not proportionate. And so in that case, it was another case, a sad story, a widow lady, she and her husband had lived on this beautiful 2.5-acre piece of farmland on a arterial road in southern Salt Lake County community. And her husband passed away. And that was sad, but she had a new chance at happiness because she found another fellow that she fell in love with, and they went to Arizona, and she told her grandson to go ahead and live in the house with a home and a barn and all these lovely amenities. And then unfortunately, she lost her second husband. So she came back, and it's 2.5 acres, and the zoning allows more than 1 lot. So she wanted to carve out a lot to build a house on, right next to the old house that her grandson's living in. And the city said, no problem. This is what we need to do. You're on an arterial highway. We want you to deed 18 feet of your front yard to us to expand the arterial highway, then give us a 12-foot slope easement, then build a horse path along the front of the area from there to there, and bury the major Utah Power and Light power line that runs across the front. And I listened to the transcript to the hearing, and the grandson is just saying, seriously. And one of the planning commission members says, how do we do that? And another one said, we do it all the time. Everybody does it. It's fine. It's in the ordinance, is what it says. Well, anyway, I was able as ombudsman to contact the mayor and others in that city, and they rewrote their ordinance. So it had some opportunity to not take all those, not call grandma a subdivider the way it was, as if it was Ivory Home or Edge Homes or something like that. So again, the case-by-case decision, if they were going to impose those requirements on her, they had to provide substantial evidence in the record showing how she created the need to bury the Utah Power and Light power line in evidence on the record. And that's what the courts have said, and that's what these cases have held, and that's what the challenges are. So how often does it come up? Well, it may have never come up in your decision making, or it may have come up more than once. But one of the things we can talk about briefly is this idea of the standard of review for your appeal authority. San Juan County, this is number 18. San Juan County had chosen what we call a review of the record. So if the appeal authority is told that they are to support the decision of the zoning administrator, the planning commission, or the city council, the administrative decision, if it's supported by substantial evidence in the record, then that means the record's closed. The other alternative, second option, is de novo, and that's a legal term meaning anew. And you have the option to have that be your review standard. If that's the standard, then the appeal authority can make a new record. And there's some reason to do that, because if the appeal authority can create a new record, then you get another chance to make it bulletproof going to the district court, if it ever is going to get there. And some cases we know are very likely to get there. You know, cases involving high dollar amount items like large subdivisions or mineral extraction or billboards or those kinds of things, or when you have controversial uses like a group home, those cases, though controversy, have been won time after time by local governments when they've taken the time to be careful and lay upon the record the evidence is necessary to support the decision. So there's two chances to build a record if the review is de novo, but only one if the review is on the record. But the local appeal is meant to provide an opportunity for one last chance to avoid court. So this appeal is required by the state statute. It can be a hearing officer or a board of adjustment or an appeal committee. They don't have to live in the town. It can be one person or several. But it's basically meant to be a circuit breaker, a pressure relief valve, one more chance to have one person look at it before it goes to court. In fact, if a person tries to sue on an administrative decision without going through the local appeal, they will be turned down by the court. And if they miss the chance to appeal and then try to go to court, the court will simply tell them it's too late. It doesn't matter anymore because you missed the deadline to file your appeal, whether it's 10 days or 15 days or whatever the local ordinance provides. You're done. The issues are settled and final. It's the only way you can start over is to start over and bring in a new application. Question or comment about that? Well, that's for a variance. So appeal authorities can grant variances, but they can also hear appeals.
And there's nothing that governs that?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
So the appeal authority sits like the judge and goes through everything we've gone through in all these cases. Like when the city council in McElhaney sat as the hearing officer, they should have said, okay, this is what the planning commission did. Was there substantial evidence to support its decision? Instead, they said, we don't want to hear. The neighbors don't like it.
So they were disadvantaged.
They missed it. They had to make their decision based on substantial evidence, whether they were reviewing the record or doing it de novo. Same thing. Right.
Greg,
Okay. Yes.
quick comment. You can make this decision, but I wonder if it might be helpful to just provide a brief explanation. You've used the term roughly proportionate once or twice. There are a couple of legal standards from court cases that deal with situations in which ordinances can be deemed essentially inapplicable or unenforceable in particular situations. And the two standards are roughly proportionate and that there be a direct nexus. Do you want to go into those for a minute or?
So question is, okay, let's say that a person comes in and otherwise qualifies. Are there times when we can impose burdens on that applicant to solve problems they're creating? And we should. I mean, that's the idea. not in every case. In some cases, cities are so eager to have someone come in that they're not, I mean, they're willing to bear some burdens. I remember the hearings we held in Harrisville when the Walmart was proposed, and the city council met on Friday and the planning commission met on Saturday. I mean, they wanted that shop and they wanted it open by Christmas if they could. It would be a lovely thing to have, the first sales tax, remittance check before Christmas. But the question, normally, the city has the opportunity to impose conditions on development that meet the burdens that are imposed by the. These are the conditions. Number one, it has to be in the ordinance. We've had cities when I was ombudsman who had beautiful trails planned through the valley up in Cache County. And someone comes in and says, we want the trail. Well, the ordinance doesn't say they have to give the trail, even if it's drawn on their land. The ordinance doesn't say you can't approve a use unless they give us the trail. And if the ordinance did say that, just as was said, it may or may not be enforceable. So in the slides I left out, there's a story of a subdivision called, I forget the name. Anyway, the case is called BAM, B-A-M, Development versus Salt Lake County. And the development's on 35th South, and the county and UDOT want to widen that road. It's out in Magna, heading west. And so they tell the subdivider that he's got to provide an additional 16 feet of road width, then put in curb gutter sidewalk and move the power lines so the road can be widened someday. And the subdivider was not amused by this. He sued, he went 3 times to the Supreme Court. And the 3rd time the court said, we are never hearing this case again. But the evidence in the record the 3rd time around was that the county had taken all of the traffic costs associated, all the cost of handling traffic in the county, and divided it by the number of houses in the county, and come up with the number for how much each house contributed. And then they took the 42 lots in the subdivision, times it by $8,000, and said that's $350,000 or something like that. That is the fair burden that this subdivision should bear. Substantial evidence in the record by a traffic engineer and an accounting firm. And then the court turns to the applicant and said, how much did it cost you to do everything you're whining about? I'm paraphrasing. The applicant said $195,000, and the court said, get out of here. I mean, it was fair, but there has to be, in other words, you can help the neighbor, the applicant can solve a problem they're creating. The fancy word the lawyers use for that is essential nexus. There has to be a connection between what the property owner is doing and the solution that's being imposed. And the best case out of that is a case out of California where the California Coastal Commission required the Nolan family to give them access to the beach in front of the property when the Nolans wanted to expand their bungalow into a beach house. And the Nolans asked the question, what are we doing to change access to the beach? We're just building a beach house. And the Coastal Commission said, no, we're the Coastal Commission. We've done this 53 times. We're doing it the 54th time. If you want anything from us, and we are by law required to sign off on your building permit, then you have to do what we want. And what we want is the public right to be on your private beach, or you can't build your cabin. And the United States Supreme Court said there was no connection between what the Nolans were doing and the right of the public to access the beach. And they also said there also was no authority in the California Coastal Commission's charter. They were to improve access to the beach, not along the beach. And that's how finally the lawyers can parse the words. So there has to be a connection, a problem created by the property owner applicant. And then the question is proportionality. And this main case is out of Tigard, Oregon, where Florence Dolan wanted to build a grocery store or a hardware store. And the city said, yes, that's fine. Build us a bike path and give us the creek that runs across your property. And Florence may have said, well, I know, I read that Nolan case. I don't have to give you the beach or the creek. And the city in Tigard said, no, but you're not listening. You're creating stormwater. You're creating a new parking area, and the water from the storm runoff is going to run into the creek. And we're the water authority, the stormwater authority, so give us the creek so we can manage your water. The court said requiring a deed to the creek was too excessive. It was disproportionate. They could restrict her interference with the flow of stormwater and solve the problem without taking a deed. And then she said, what about the bike path? I've been selling toilets for 40 years. Nobody ever took one home on a bicycle. And the city said, well, no, it's part of our general traffic plan. You know, people on bicycles won't be driving pickups, and there'll be room for pickups full of toilets on the street. And the court said, okay, so far so good, but you need to show by substantial evidence that the burden you're placing on her for traffic concerns is roughly proportionate to the burden she's placing on you. So that basically is the law of conditions on development in a nutshell. Does that help? Okay. Filibuster's almost over. So I just want to point out a few things that are available to you. Let's look at the last few slides. They're just the names. This is one, the Land Use Academy of Utah, referred to affectionately as Luau. They do training videos, publications linked to legislative changes. It focuses on city planners. It's mainly there for city council members and planning commission members, and it's run by the Utah League of Cities and Towns. But there's good material there on how to do land use. Next slide. The Institute, which I manage, has a land use library, and we're now doing several things to try to help. This is utahlanduse.org. You just click on library. There's a database of every advisory opinion written by the ombudsman. And the ombudsman publishes the opinions, but doesn't provide an index. And so this is a comprehensive index. So it's a searchable PDF grid. And on the left-hand side are a number of different land use topics like variances and conditional use permits and special exceptions and exactions. And then it tells who the parties were to every case. And then it describes the holding, what the ombudsman said. So if you're interested in road exactions on a motel development, you can look for motels and see which lines up with exactions. Because again, you search keywords in this whole database. There's 1,000 lines of information on 264 opinions. And so if the ombudsman has written on the subject, it can be considered not authoritative, but very helpful on what the law, how the law might be applied. So the biggest question that they get is about these exactions or conditions on development. And you can narrow it down to the, you know, can you require a full road where a half road will do? And what about a small subdivision? And how do you determine proportionality? And they're just really helpful, but there's an index there. Also, topical review land use regulations. We have a couple of dozen topics now. Like there's an 18 or 20 page summary on conditional use permits, non-conforming uses, those that are grandfathered, on administrative land use decisions, on how to do land use appeals, on referenda and initiatives. Just about every topic that's covered in this book is covered in great detail with every case and statute cited. Particularly helpful to lawyers who want to understand all the landmark cases on the subject. And that's available for anyone to review by topic. Detailed summary of specific topics, streaming video of the fall conference. We have probably 100 hours now of videos there on topics where, like we discussed the coming phenomenon of land use development authorities, like the one at Hill Air Force Base, where they're doing land use development through state authority, the inland port, and the Point of the Mountain, which is now actually the legislature last session exempted them from all the Draper land use controls. So the state project there, 700 acres, will now create its own land use. I'll be interested to see how that works when it's not being administrated ultimately by an elected official. new strategy there. But these fall conference videos will cover all kinds of topics, short-term rentals and accessory dwelling units. And we've got a 30-minute or 60-minute tape on each of them where people talk about the issues. Even our 3-hour training conference that I did with Wilf Summercorn and the ombudsman. And then soon we'll have the Utah Law of Eminent Domain up and running, complete summary of all of that. So these are all resources available that may be of some use. Is there another slide after that one? The Property Rights Ombudsman, they publish their opinions. It's a portal for information and dispute resolution. They do recent case law updates, and they also resolve disputes with eminent domain. Next slide. That's the end. Any other comment or question? Completely wore you down. I'm going to stack books on that table. If you don't have one, please take one. And we'll hope you'll enjoy that as well. Thank you very much.
I've got a couple of housekeeping items real quick related to, if that's all right, before we get talking real quick. Yeah, before we break, I have, in addition to Craig's book, I have a handout that I prepared. It's a 2-page handout. I didn't prepare it, but I printed it. This is prepared by the organization that Craig's with, the Utah Land Use Institute, and it's called 15 Basic Rules of Utah Land Use Regulation. It summarizes a lot of the information that was discussed tonight, and it's one of the most helpful summaries of land use law and its impacts that I've ever come across, number one. And then number two, for any Pleasant View City planning commissioners, if you could meet me in the lobby, I have a form that we need to have signed in the next few days before we head into the next fiscal year. So if you could meet me in the lobby, it'll just take a minute for you to fill that out.
Oh, is there a certificate over
It is.
But I already gave you one.
All right, we got a couple more items on the agenda and then we can get out of here. Does Laurie leave or is she? Okay. Okay, we probably got at least 10 minutes then. Okay, probably 25 minutes. Huh? I'm freezing. I need to go somewhere where it's warm. Yeah, that was interesting. She puts the opening in her hand and tries to push it close. She can figure out why she can't smash it.
Hey there, go talk to your husband about that.
I know, I need to hang out with more engineers, apparently.
Oh, that's a common sense thing.
Dave, Dana, and
Sarah and,
Are you cold, Tyson? Me
yeah,
too.
who turned the air down to 60?
Freezing.
That's 71.
It's cold.
Yeah, it's cold.
I mean, is the recording? All right, we're back in session after completing item 6, our joint work session with planning commission and neighboring towns. Appreciate their attendance. We'll move back to item 3C, the city hall ADA upgrade to Bowen Construction in the amount of $141,860.50. Again, 50 cents. That 50 cents is important. Tyson, back to you.
This project had 200,000 budgeted. So coming in under and, it'll help improve the walkway down to the Veterans Monument. The city office compliance for ADA compliance. Will address the frontage all the way up to the front door. I know Dana and the group spent countless hours making it line up to make it compliant. But the bid going into Bowen Construction, we'd recommend the bid award with the addendum. I think it came in as the same. So picking between galvanized handrail was the only difference and having the black painted. We thought they'd come in different pricing, but with this group, it was the same. So.
Okay, questions? Go ahead. I'll start with Steve.
We must need to, or jog in place or something.
Break up some furniture and start a fire.
Is there any way we can put anything on there to address why they're here, to address the needs for the clock tower base? Can we, I know we have to accept this bid, but while they're here, can we do something to dig that out and have them fix that while they're here? I don't know if that has to be a separate bid or if we can do what the rules are, have them do an addendum to our request or something. I don't know.
So I think a lot of them, oh yeah. No, you have a lot of the similar quantities, so I would think that would be possible with a change order. You could iron out the detail and then bring it in.
While they're here, I would like to have that done. Or looked at and.
Probably be cheaper since they're already on site.
Actually, it wouldn't be.
It matches the type of work they're doing, so it's totally acceptable to change order into.
So I would like to make that motion that we accept this full construction with a possible change order. However, I don't want to make that a blanket approval. but I'd like to have them, while they're doing it, see what that would cost us.
We'll provide them the design, the original design, show the limits, have them provide us a quote for that.
I made some suggestions to the mayor, and maybe he could talk to you or Tyson about looking at that. Pulling the monument stones out, or not the monument.
We'll talk when we have the committee meet.
So do some other things, but anyway, I'd like to do that with that, so I make that motion, if we can have that in there.
Second.
Okay, any further questions, Dave, you have?
So is there a drawing that shows?
Yes, should be in your packet.
Very ugly, I hate it.
So there'll be some work out in the parking lot. And again, we'd have to sit down and iron out some coordination on getting in and out of the city office while construction was underway.
We're only missing it by what, a foot at the bottom of the slope, right? Is that
Without the ramp.
for ADA compliance? I mean, it was such a small thing.
Yeah, I mean, it seems small, but when you have to make it running slope of 5%, like 1 foot's a long way to make up. So that, I mean, that's it. You just have to constantly chase it until you can meet existing, and that this was our as many. Right, and this gets your entrance to City Hall, this level into compliance as
Just
well.
put an elevator in. Originally when they built it.
I just want to make sure, I just want to make sure you know that. The built quality of the expect. I don't think when we did the we didn't have a drawing or specification that we held the standard.
And yeah, we did have some drawings, but there were some inherent challenges, and I'm happy to talk with you about that another time. It ultimately, we got a lot of people helping in there.
But we have, there's 12 pages of plans. We have the city standards, specifications.
That was already done before we went out to the and stuff.
The contractor will be contractually obligated to meet the plans. So yeah, you do have a guarantee, and the bonds as well. Yeah, it was the only way you get.
All right, had a motion by Gibson, second by Arrington. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 3D, paint striping project to interstate barricade in the amount of $57,178.30.
So this one, we didn't know how much it was going to come in at. So this one started with our more formal process, not the advertised. Obviously came in over the amount. We did reach out to 3 separate contractors that have been consistent with the companies that we've seen get these projects or do some of our smaller ones in the past. So I wouldn't anticipate if you did a ton of advertising or anything that you're going to get a different, those same companies to respond. So this was the only one that responded to that deadline. You're running out of that window for painting your street striping, all your crosswalks, basically anything through the city. We're to the point where some of our older sections haven't been done since the project itself. And this would be a fresh coat throughout the whole city for your striping, all your noticing, all your lettering, arrows, crosswalks. Just,
Make a motion that have to be done. That's needed.
and it's under budget. We just have to move it into this next budget year. We didn't get it done in time, so that would be the only change. We just got it put together this year. So we have all the footages now, where before you had to, it was a paper map that was sort of hand drawn, and as things changed, you had to sort of go do your sections wherever you wanted. But now there's a map. We'll update it once it's all painted. It was painted this year with the reflective beads to this standard. And so then you can follow that timeline and see how long it's lasting and start to put more of the costs. Now that you have these true costs to it, we can plant that into that mapping system, and it'll give you your estimate for next year. The good practice is 2 to 3 years, so we'll
I
start
just have
to
a question on
evaluate
that
that.
striping. A couple of years ago, Dave Erickson brought up an idea to me. I think I passed it along to you, but I just want to bring it back to the forefront. He's saying right in front of his house on Pleasant View Drive, pretty close to 1100. The striping is kind of like lopsided. So in other words, if you're riding a bicycle west, you have plenty of road. But if you're riding a bicycle, to the east, there's no shoulder at all. So just wondering if we could take like that striping and just like move it, adjust it a little bit. And I can show you exactly where we're talking about, but it's like between 1000 and 1100.
Yeah, where they haven't improved the south side.
Yeah. So it'd be like Rex Cragen and Dave Erickson and right along there. I don't know if you know where those, but yeah.
You could we'd have to evaluate the standards because there's rules to all that, but
Just-
That's right now, that's in the middle of the road. It's been improved. The south side hasn't.
Now, take a look at it and see if it's
See what
not doable, it's not.
yeah, if it's not, it's not, but now's the time to talk about it before we lay these stripes down.
that section's been repainted. That's the newest repainted section with last year's project though. But yes,
Okay.
either way, you'd have to black it out at this point. So if you were gonna do it.
No, he's just saying like it's just misproportionate. Like there's so much on the north side and there's 0 on the south side that he's just saying, couldn't we just even move that just a hair,
It sounds like it is in the middle right now. It just hasn't been improved on.
I'll have to look
And by
at
the
that.
time, like, Rex Cragen has these like plants that grow way out onto the road anyway. And there's really nothing.
What is the standard for what we have set up? So what residential streets, certain, I don't know how to set a strategy.
Yeah, so so right now you're at the point where the city would have to do the south side of Pleasant View Drive, basically anywhere that the homes already exist and you're not having an abutting subdivision. So that part you're going to extend when you do. So, but
Which ones?
oh, sorry. It'd be based off your right of way width or the asphalt pavement width. I don't know what the.
So 800 West doesn't need a center line.
Yeah.
Pleasant View Drive does.
Oh,
It's made, anything above a standard residential street. So your minor collectors, major collectors, arterials, things like that are the ones that definitely get striped. And then any of your special residential roads, like ones that are by schools, things like that, that might need.
That's Alberta.
What the classification is, and typically it's anything, like my brain goes to right away with, so 66 foot and above. Your standard residential currently.
Pleasant Drive is narrow, but it's.
The pavement width is narrow, correct, but the right of way is 80.
So like the parks and freestyle, on
Right.
Narrow.
Do I have a second? I don't. Motion by Gibson, second by Yuri. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, item 4, revised document, disposition of abandoned water line section at 2550 North.
This, oh, sorry.
Amy, go ahead, Amy.
Jump in there. This should take all of half a second. So, we utilize, temporary. Because there's not an attached deed, Weaver County recommended the removal of the word deed.
Or just remove one word.
I'll make the motion that we revise it as stated.
Second.
Motion by Gibson, second by Arrington. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Item 5, Central Weaver Sewer Improvement District, notice Central Weaver Sewer District Improvement is proposing a tax increase, and by a new state law, when they do that, because they are not an elected board, has to go back to each of the legislative bodies just to be informed. Don't get to make a decision or anything.
Let's hope we can vote against
Oh,
that.
no.
I'm excited right there.
Oh, man.
So I'm just gonna read the letter to you and then we'll go. On June 12th, 2023, the Central Weaver Sewer Improvement District Board of Trustees declared an intent to increase property tax above the certified rate. During this discussion, requests made of trustees to report to their legislative bodies. This report is intended to comply with a recent addition to Utah Code 17B-1-1003. Has to be in before July 31st. Okay. Just some supporting information. The district treats, well, you've had it, hopefully you've read it. The major cost, well, one thing that's interesting, 30 million gallons a day. I think that surprised me when I heard 30 million gallons a day goes through there.
We know the time. I'm just wondering if that's runoff season that we calculated that. Some pumps going into sewer.
Oh, actually this spring that was closer to 90 million.
Okay, so then that's the actual annual.
Certain, well, and this was an extra, sure the average would go up based on the spring. A lot of infiltration that they discovered. A lot of cities, including our cities, have worked to fix that, but there's still a lot coming from other cities.
I'll take my shower for 30 minutes.
A lot of this is federally mandated. Their proposed increase on a residence for the average for the district is 477,000. But increased from 126 to 142, so $16 per year.
Per resident.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Business would be $29 per year. So that's a 12.87% if the whole thing is approved. Public hearing will be August 14th at 6 p.m. at the admin building, 2618 West Pioneer Road. That's been informed.
Boring.
Yeah, most of it's new. Yeah. Well, a lot of it is the day-to-day operations. They're going to be bonding for the improvements. Chlorine. Wow, did it go? I mean, did it happen to say?
Doesn't say.
It went from like $90 to $2,000. Yeah, it's ridiculous what it went to.
That's going back down.
Yeah, it come down. It was closer to like 900%. So it's come down a little bit. It was crazy. It was just insane. It's like, is this a supply chain thing? Or are they just gouging us type of deal? You know?
We don't have any control over this and it's fine, but
It's just,
when the tax statements come out, I do think it would be helpful if we communicated to the residents that
We don't have truth in taxation. We're not raising taxes here. But here's how you, and I know we've kind of done this, but here's how your property taxes break down. When you pay that $4,000 bill, $87 of it comes to Pleasantview or whatever the breakdown, $160. And the rest of it, like pie chart, basically. So I know the tax statement says that, but it just may be good for us to, I know most people I talk to aren't.
And I thought, and I did last year, but and I'll do it again this year. I put in a thing about, our portion is about 7%.
Yeah.
We were county schools and we were county. Too big.
And so, we're pretty low. We're pretty low on the totem pole. I think we're just under the mosquito abatement list. No, we're over it.
Well, this one.
Yeah.
It's part of your property. Isn't it on your property tax?
It's a separate line item on the tax.
Oh,
It's got
It is on my tax.
property tax.
There are pass-throughs with.
But not this, isn't.
No, this is separate.
Is it a separate item? on your property tax?
It is on sewer.
Yeah, sewer's separate, but that's a whole different, that's a.
So this would come out on your property tax.
Yes, this portion's on your property tax. They're divided in two parts. Part, it is the strangest. And every new mayor, and I was no exception, raises this issue. It's like, wait a minute. So the other part is based on assessed values as well. And it's a fee they charge back to the city. It's a combination of assessed values and actual usage, but the assessed value, and I'm like, assessed value, what's that got to do? If a $2 million home in Pole Patch or Phil's home flushes a toilet, it's exactly the same.
But his are gold plated.
Well, that's true. But he flushes the toilet, it's the same as Ogden City's.
Right.
You know,
it shouldn't
it's,
matter.
and I was told, give it up. When this was created, Ogden,
What was that quote?
Ogden has veto power.
That's the, what was that?
And it benefit, everybody's subsidizing Ogden City's sewer. Everybody is and every mayor, it's so funny because first time they go is, hey, wait, why is it like this? I just, for 5 years now, I've been laughing because I was shut right down on it. But yeah, and they told the only way is to recreate the charter for the district. Change it. And it would be very expensive. And I'm like, well, it might be worth it though. City, yeah. But then. So
their rate is changed. Because they need to advance. Right, so.
yeah, their rate, we just approved the new rate. That was part of the rate increase.
So.
To make improvements.
Yeah.
Or triple dip.
The property values are.
Yeah, but the same thing. They don't get more money just because property values go up.
That's why I flush mine twice every single time.
That's why they're charging us more.
Go through truth and taxation. No, we're not. They're just, I'm not sure why this new requirement is, but it's like inform the, well, it's because they're not an elected board. Yes.
So my question is, we bill for sewer and stormwater. And then they also have a property tax thing. So where's the money going different for those two?
Well, it's just like our sales tax and our property tax. It all goes into.
They have a fee, a user fee that we pay every month, and then they're also getting it on the property taxes. So they're double dipping.
Not really double dipping.
So
I mean, they could,
go to different things.
I guess they could do it all through property tax. Well, I think they ought to do it all through fees and not through property tax. Because again, if you got $1 million home and you flush your toilet, what's the difference between a $100,000 home or a trailer flushing their toilet? It's not like you're using the toilet more because you live in a nicer house. But, well, that's.
Well, I want Steve, I want that on the.
Feel free. Yeah. So it's a combination of the two, but it's an interesting formula and one I do not agree with. And every year, in fact, I voted no again because, and I said the same thing. I do not agree with the way this formula works. So I was the only one that voted no, but still I voted no. So, all right, item 6, we already accomplished. There is no other business on here. We will be having a follow-up meeting for Founder's Day on, did we finalize that? July 11th.
Downstairs, 3:30.
I don't know if she sent that out yet.
Want me to send a meeting invite?
She hasn't sent it. Heather hasn't sent it out yet.
Heather's sitting.
Okay, perfect. Do you mind? I know we don't have other business.
Sure.
We appreciate the suggestion. We give some, getting people in our day to get postcards together and trash and recycling. So,
It says she's in Hawaii and she wishes we were there. So
If you put it on that, we'll share it.
when's that start? Next week.
I know, it's.
So
Somebody asked me yesterday, they're like, oh, I said, this is canceled. Yeah, some provider.
Well, I guess that's my.
Figured appreciated.
I keep them informed.
We did. So for now, they're gonna utilize the routes as we have scheduled. But we do have a little bit of a caveat in the language in that they said, you know, depending on how things go, they may tweak here and there, and we will absolutely provide very massive notification.
Partners up how we are. Cool.
I got a thing on 1100 West from Stetson. It's really interesting and I'll get it forwarded to you guys, but it's funny that the average speed, okay, calculated average speed is 22, 23, 23. That was high, 23, 21, 21, 22, 23.
Is that right past Dave's house or where is that?
Yeah.
Lower, the one that's been complained. That's what people are averaging.
Yeah, no question. This is science.
Well, but there are plenty. Maximum speed was 47. Okay. That's probably, yeah, exactly. And well, it's got Dave by it, so I don't. So I mean, it's very interesting. Okay, it was.
Take the data, was it like over a few hours?
It was over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
All day long?
7 day, all 24 hours a day. Total vehicles, first day was 996. Second was 1,246. Third was 1,289.
Is that right before the stop sign? Or?
It'd be interesting to know, was that a weekend? 525, 526, somebody know? Okay, then back to the 27th was 959 and 28th was way down to 651. Well, that's because school's out. And that's, you can see right where school went out, 625. So total of 6,510 cars. So
The only question, we don't know where the sign is.
he's got the
I think you could place it in 10 different locations and get all the.
3050 north.
30,
3050 north.
Ideally, it'd be the middle between the stop signs.
Just, yeah, so what the.
It's not 65, you know, that's, I think that's the big thing there. So.
Well, I mean, you can see from the data that there are outliers. There are people speeding, like I said, 47 was the top car, but so, yeah, I don't know. We're going to have probably a work session in the near future to figure out, okay, what are we going to do with this data? Because now they're doing 600 West. I don't know if you've seen the speed trailer there lately. They're doing 600.
I've intentionally got faster on that.
Yeah, me too. So I could up the speed.
I'm at least 35 there. We've already done the study.
No, I haven't really.
We've already done the study.
We have a, no, I'm just kidding, but it's like, I know, it's like, oh, it's flashing. I look, it's 32 and I'm like, okay, I try to set my cruise even at low speed, so public. All right, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn, or did we already adjourn? Amy, did you have something?
Second.
else?
No,
Okay.
thank you.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Carries. Phil and motion and second. Amy. Yep. Yep. Looking forward to the. Oh, I don't know.
Thank you, Kaiser. Water for you.
You know, address your question about models.
He said he was going to drive through a neighborhood, on Skyline. One time jumped in front of Page's car.
No, but I mean, it's. Yeah. No, but I mean, yeah, I mean, so the council's having this quiet discussion, but